The password that burned it all down. At 4:07 in the morning, while his 6-year-old daughter burned with fever in the next room, Nolan Pierce sat in the blue glow of 3 monitors and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd chosen her over a server crash. The company alerts were screaming, his daughter was screaming louder. And in that moment, something inside him finally broke. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once, like a bone that had been carrying too much weight for too long. What happened next would bring the most powerful woman in Seattle to his front door, expose a multi-million-dollar betrayal, and force 2 people who had every reason to hate each other to fight side by side. For a company, for the truth, and for a little girl who just wanted her dad to stay home. If this story finds you tonight, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and stay with me to the very end. Because this one is going to hit different. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It came down in sheets against the windows of the narrow 2-story house in Ballard, a working-class pocket of Seattle where the old Scandinavian fishing families had long since been replaced by tech workers and overpriced coffee shops. But this house hadn't been updated in decades. The porch sagged on the left side. The gutters dripped in uneven rhythms. The front yard was more mud than grass, and the mailbox had been dented by a delivery truck 6 months ago and never fixed. Inside, the situation wasn't much better. Nolan Pierce sat at his desk in what used to be the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of a life lived entirely in crisis mode. 3 monitors cast pale light across towers of unopened mail, a half-eaten sleeve of crackers, and 2 coffee mugs growing things that probably qualified as science experiments. His phone had been buzzing non-stop for the past 40 minutes, a cascade of Slack messages, email alerts, and increasingly frantic texts from people whose names he could barely keep straight anymore. He was 34 years old and looked 45. Not because of genetics, because of what 4 years of single parenthood combined with 80-hour work weeks could do to a man who had once been considered one of the sharpest systems architects on the West Coast. His dark hair was longer than it should have been, curling at the collar of a flannel shirt he'd been wearing for 2 days. His eyes, once sharp and clear, were rimmed with the permanent bruising of chronic sleep deprivation. His hands that could navigate 500,000 lines of code with surgical precision, trembled slightly as he reached for the coffee mug closest to him, found it empty, and set it back down with a quiet thud. The Slack channel was melting down. DevOps critical. Authentication. Bridge failed at 3:22 Pacific Standard Time. Cascade failure across all European nodes, client-facing portals returning 503 errors. Nolan. Where are you? DevOps. Critical. Failover didn't catch, backup clusters throwing the same error. This is the encryption layer. Nobody else has the architecture map for this. Nolan. DevOps. Critical. Board meeting in 14 hours. Merger due diligence depends on uptime proof. If this isn't resolved by morning, we are looking at a $2.3 billion problem. Someone get Nolan on the phone. He read every message. He understood every word. He knew exactly what was happening. The authentication bridge he'd built 2 years ago was failing because someone had pushed a patch without running it through his review protocol. He knew which config file was corrupted. He knew which backup key would restore the European nodes. He could probably fix the entire thing in 45 minutes if he opened a terminal and started typing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, from the bedroom down the hall, came a sound that cut through every alert, every notification, every line of code scrolling across his screens. Daddy? It was small, thin, the kind of voice a child makes when they've been calling for a long time and nobody has come. Nolan closed his eyes. Daddy, I'm hot. He pushed back from the desk so hard the chair hit the wall behind him. The hallway was dark. He'd stopped replacing bulbs in the fixtures months ago, and he navigated it from memory, his socked feet silent on the scarred hardwood floor. Mia's room was at the end, the door half open, a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon casting a dim amber glow across walls covered in crayon drawings and taped-up pages torn from coloring books. She was sitting up in bed, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her favorite stuffed rabbit, a threadbare thing named Professor Bun that had been through the washing machine so many times its left ear was barely attached, clutched against her chest. Her cheeks were flushed a deep, angry red, And when Nolan knelt beside her bed and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead, the heat that radiated from her skin sent a bolt of pure fear straight through his chest. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered, keeping his voice steady even as his mind started running calculations he didn't want to run. "How long have you been awake?" "A long time," Mia said. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "I called you, but you didn't come." The words landed like a fist to the sternum. "I'm here now," he said. "I'm right here." He found the thermometer in the bathroom, buried under a pile of towels he'd been meaning to fold for a week, and brought it back to her bedside. She opened her mouth obediently, a gesture so practiced it made his stomach turn. This wasn't the first time she'd been sick and he'd been slow to respond. It wasn't the second time either. The thermometer beeped. He looked at the number and felt the floor shift beneath him. 103.8. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to her. "Okay, we're going to get you some medicine, and then we're going to get you cool," and then his phone buzzed in his back pocket. Then again. Then a third time in rapid succession. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, found the children's Tylenol in the cabinet above the refrigerator, right where it always was, because some part of him had always known this moment would come, and brought both back to Mia's room. She took the medicine without complaint, which scared him more than the fever itself. Mia complained about everything: the texture of scrambled eggs, the way her socks bunched up inside her shoes, the specific shade of purple in her favorite cartoon. A Mia who took medicine silently was a Mia who felt too bad to fight. He soaked a washcloth in cool water and laid it across her forehead. She flinched, then settled. "Stay," she whispered. "I'm staying." "You always say that." He opened his mouth to respond and found that he had nothing. No reassurance, no promise. Because she was right. He always said that, and he never meant it. Not really. Not when the next alert came in. Not when the next crisis erupted. Not when the next fire needed the one person in the entire company who apparently knew where all the extinguishers were kept. His phone buzzed again. And again. Nolan sat on the edge of Mia's bed and watched her eyes flutter closed. The washcloth was already warm from her fever. He replaced it with a fresh one. She murmured something he couldn't catch and rolled toward him, her small hand finding the fabric of his sleeve and gripping it with surprising strength, as if she knew, even in her half-sleep, that holding on was the only way to keep him in the room. He stayed like that for 20 minutes. His phone accumulated 47 new messages. When he was sure she was asleep, not deeply, but enough, he eased his sleeve free from her grip, tucked Professor Bunn more securely under her arm, and walked back to the dining room. The monitors were still alive with cascading failure alerts. The Slack channel had devolved into something approaching hysteria. His personal email had 17 new messages, including 3 from Vivian Slate's executive assistant, each more terse than the last. Nolan sat down in his chair. He stared at the screens for a long time. Then he opened a new email, addressed it to his direct supervisor, CC'd Human Resources, and began to type. "Marcus, effective immediately, I resign from my position as Principal Systems Architect at Slate Dynamics. I will not be serving a notice period. I will not be available for transition meetings, knowledge transfer sessions, or emergency consultations. The master encryption key for the authentication bridge is stored in a cold vault under the alias MIA-FIRST. I named it that 2 years ago because I told myself my daughter would always come first. I was lying to myself then. I'm not lying anymore. I've given this company 4 years of my life. I've missed birthdays, school plays, parent-teacher conferences, and more bedtime stories than I can count. I've eaten more meals at my desk than at my own kitchen table. I once spent Thanksgiving Day rebuilding a server cluster while my daughter ate reheated macaroni and cheese alone in front of the television. She was 4. I'm done. The systems I built are documented. The architecture maps are on the shared drive. If your team can't figure it out from there, that's not my failure. It's yours, for building a company that made one person's departure an existential crisis. Don't contact me. Nolan Pierce. He read it twice, changed nothing, hit send. The email disappeared into the digital void with a soft whoosh, and Nolan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a kind of terrifying, weightless freedom, like stepping off a cliff and discovering he didn't care whether there was water at the bottom. He closed all 3 monitors. The room went dark. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Nolan Pierce walked to the couch, pulled a blanket over himself, and fell asleep before his head hit the cushion. Awesome. The pounding started at 10:47 in the morning. Nolan knew the exact time because the first thing he did when the sound jolted him awake was look at the clock on the microwave, which was the only timepiece in the house that still worked. The stove clock had been blinking 12 o'clock for 3 months. His watch was dead on the bathroom counter. His phone, which he'd silenced and left face down on his desk, was probably somewhere around 9,000 notifications by now. The pounding came again. Hard. Insistent. The kind of knocking that said the person on the other side of the door was not accustomed to waiting and had no intention of starting now. Nolan swung his legs off the couch and stood up too fast. The blood rushed from his head, and the room tilted sideways for a moment before stabilizing. He checked on Mia first. She was still asleep, still warm, but the Tylenol had brought her fever down to 101.2, which was better, and then walked to the front door, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. He opened it without checking who was there, which was a mistake he would replay in his mind many times over the following days. Vivian Slate stood on his porch. She was soaked. The rain, which had apparently upgraded from steady to biblical sometime during the night, had done its best to destroy what was clearly a very expensive charcoal trench coat, and had partially succeeded. Her dark hair, usually sculpted into the kind of precise arrangement that suggested a personal stylist in military-grade hairspray, was plastered against the sides of her face. Her heels, because of course she was wearing heels, even in a rainstorm, even on a Saturday morning, even on the sagging porch of a house in Ballard, had sunk slightly into the soft wood of the top step. But none of that was what Nolan noticed first. What he noticed first was her eyes. He'd seen Vivian Slate on screens, in company-wide emails, in the occasional all-hands meeting where she descended from the 37th floor like a weather system. She was 41 years old, the youngest female CEO of a major tech firm in the Pacific Northwest, and she had built her reputation on a foundation of ruthless efficiency, strategic brilliance, and the widely held belief among her employees that she did not, in fact, possess human emotions. They called her the Ice Queen. They said it behind her back, in break rooms and Slack channels and late-night text threads. They said she'd fired her own CFO on Christmas Eve. They said she'd once made a vice president cry in a board meeting and then asked if anyone else had questions. They said a lot of things about Vivian Slate, and most of them were designed to explain the simple, uncomfortable fact that she made people feel small without appearing to try. But right now, standing on Nolan's porch at 10:47 on a Saturday morning, drenched in rain and radiating a fury that seemed almost chemical in its intensity, Vivian Slate's eyes held something he'd never seen in any photograph or video call. Fear. "You," she said, and the single word carried the weight of a corporate empire teetering on its foundations. Nolan blinked. "What are you—" "Do you have any idea?" Vivian continued, her voice low and controlled in a way that was somehow more terrifying than shouting, "What you've done?" "I quit," Nolan said. "That's what I did. Now, if you'll excuse me, my daughter is—" "Your resignation has triggered a cascading failure in the most critical system architecture of a company currently in the middle of a $4.2 billion merger." Vivian's jaw was tight. A muscle in her cheek twitched. "Your authentication bridge is down. The European nodes are offline. Our due diligence window closes in." She checked her phone. 26 hours. "And if we cannot demonstrate system integrity by then, Meridian Capital walks." "Do you understand what that means?" "It means you should have had redundancy protocols," Nolan said. The look Vivian gave him could have frozen the rain mid-fall. "Let me in," she said. "No." "Mr. Pierce, my daughter has 101 fever. I haven't slept in 2 days. I quit your company 6 hours ago, and I meant every word. So whatever speech you've prepared about loyalty or duty or contractual obligations, I haven't prepared a speech." Vivian took one step closer. The porch groaned under the shift in weight. "I've prepared a lawsuit, non-compete clause, intellectual property agreements, and a confidentiality provision that you signed 4 years ago that specifically prohibits the abandonment of critical systems without a supervised transition period. My legal team can have papers filed by Monday morning. By Tuesday, your bank accounts will be frozen pending litigation. By Wednesday, you won't be able to afford the children's Tylenol you're using to keep your daughter's fever down. The air between them went very still. Nolan's hand tightened on the doorframe. He could feel the grain of the wood pressing into his palm, could feel the cold rain misting against his face, could feel every cell in his body telling him to slam the door and walk away. But he could also feel the weight of Mia's medical bills, the ones from last month's ear infection, the ones from the dental visit he'd put on a credit card, the ones from the pediatrician who gently suggested that maybe Mia's frequent illnesses were related to stress and inconsistent sleep schedules, and the kind of diet that happens when a single father is too exhausted to cook. He could feel the mortgage payment that was due in 9 days. He could feel the reality of his situation settling around him like the rain, cold, relentless, and impossible to escape. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to fix the authentication bridge. I want you to restore the European nodes. I want you to verify system integrity so that when Meridian's technical team runs their audit, every light is green and every number checks out." Vivian's voice was precise, mechanical, like she was reading from a contract. "In exchange, I will authorize a severance package that includes 6 months of full salary, continuation of benefits, and a release from your non-compete. You fix this, you walk clean. That's the deal. And if I say no, then I will ruin you." She said it without blinking. "Not because I want to, because I have 7,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on this merger closing, and I will not let one man's midlife crisis—" "My daughter was burning up," Nolan snapped, his voice cracking for the first time. "She was sitting in the dark calling for me while I was staring at your server alerts. She's 6 years old and she needed her father, and I wasn't there because I was too busy making sure your company's infrastructure didn't collapse for the 15th time this quarter. So don't you dare stand on my porch and call this a midlife crisis." The rain filled the silence between them. Vivian stared at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, something quick and involuntary, like a door opening and closing in the same breath. She looked away, just for a moment, at the muddy yard and the dented mailbox and the rain pooling in the broken gutters. When she looked back, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but quieter. "How high is the fever?" The question caught Nolan so off guard that he answered before he could stop himself. 101.2, down from 103.8 at 4 this morning. Vivian nodded once, a small, tight nod that might have meant anything or nothing. "I need 90 minutes of your time," she said. "After that, I'm gone. You'll never hear from me again." Nolan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time, past the expensive coat and the corporate armor and the carefully constructed mask of control. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, skillfully concealed with makeup but visible this close. He saw the slight tremor in her left hand, the one not holding her phone. He saw the tension in her shoulders, wound so tight it looked painful. She was scared, not just worried or stressed or frustrated, genuinely afraid. He'd never considered the possibility that Vivian Slate could be afraid of anything. 90 minutes, he said, and then you leave." "Agreed." He stepped aside. She walked past him into the house, and he watched her take in the chaos. The mail towers, the unwashed mugs, the monitors dark on their desk, the blanket crumpled on the couch, with a single, sweeping glance that revealed nothing. "Your house is—" she began. "Don't." She pressed her lips together and said nothing else. Nolan closed the door against the rain and moved to his desk. He powered on the monitors one at a time, the familiar startup glow illuminating the room in stages. He pulled up a terminal, logged into the remote server through his VPN, and started running diagnostics. Vivian stood behind him, arms crossed, watching the code scroll across the screen with an intensity that suggested she understood at least some of what she was seeing. "You should sit down," Nolan said without looking at her. "You're dripping on my floor." "Your floor has seen worse." He almost smiled. Almost. The diagnostics took 12 minutes. When they finished, Nolan leaned back in his chair and stared at the results, and the feeling that spread through his chest was not the familiar frustration of a system failure. It was something colder, something that tasted like dread. "What is it?" Vivian asked. She'd moved closer, reading over his shoulder. He could smell her perfume, something expensive and sharp, cut through with the clean scent of rain. "The authentication bridge didn't just fail," Nolan said slowly. "Someone changed the master encryption key." "Changed it how?" "The key I set up 2 years ago, MIA-FIRST. It's been overwritten, replaced with a different key during a patch that was pushed 3 days ago." He pulled up the commit log and scrolled through it, his eyes moving faster than his fingers. The patch was authorized by someone with admin-level access. But here's the thing. The patch itself is clean. Standard security update. The key change was buried inside it, hidden in a subroutine that wouldn't show up in a normal code review. Vivian's expression didn't change, but her posture did. She went very still, the kind of stillness that predators adopt right before they strike. "Someone did this deliberately," she said. It wasn't a question. "It gets worse." Nolan opened another window, ran another set of commands, and felt the dread in his chest crystallize into something hard and sharp. Whoever changed the key also planted a logic bomb in the failover system. If anyone tries to brute force the new encryption, tries to guess the password or run a decryption algorithm, the bomb triggers and executes a complete data purge. Everything. Client records, financial documents, source code, backup archives, all of it. Gone. The room was very quiet, except for the rain. "How long do we have?" Vivian asked. "The bomb is passive. It doesn't do anything unless someone tries to crack the encryption. So as long as nobody at the office is stupid enough to—" His phone, still face down on the desk, suddenly lit up with a call. He turned it over. The screen showed the name Marcus Chen, his now former supervisor. Nolan answered. "Marcus, tell me nobody's touched the encryption." The silence on the other end was its own kind of answer. "Marcus." "We tried a key rotation about 20 minutes ago," Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man who has recently realized he is standing on the edge of a very deep hole. "Standard procedure for a failed authentication. Nobody knew about—" "Nolan, what's happening? The system just locked us out completely. Every access point, even the backup terminals." Nolan closed his eyes. "You triggered the first layer. The logic bomb is armed now. If anyone touches anything else, anything at all, it detonates." "Detonates? What do you mean detonates?" "I mean, everything gets erased. Every server, every backup, every redundant system. The whole architecture, gone." The sound Marcus made was not quite a word. "Get everyone away from the terminals," Nolan said. "Physically away. Unplug keyboards if you have to. Nobody touches anything until I figure this out." He ended the call and turned to face Vivian. She was standing with her arms at her sides now, her hands balled into fists, her face the color of marble. "This isn't a system failure," Nolan said. "This is sabotage. Someone inside your company built a trap, buried it in a routine patch, and set it to go off at the worst possible moment, right before the merger closes." "Who?" The word came out like a blade. "I don't know yet. But whoever it is has admin-level access, knows the system architecture well enough to hide a logic bomb in a subroutine, and timed this to do maximum damage." He paused. "This was planned, Vivian. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone's been setting this up for weeks, maybe months." She stared at him, and he watched the calculations happening behind her eyes, the rapid-fire assessment of allies and enemies, of who had access and who had motive, of the political landscape of a company she had built from nothing and defended against everyone who wanted to take it from her. "Can you disarm it?" she asked. "Maybe, if I can figure out the new encryption key without triggering the bomb. But that's not a brute force problem. It's a detective problem. I need to figure out who did this because the key they used will be something personal, something meaningful to them. That's how these things work. The password is always a confession." Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a sound came from the hallway that stopped them both. Small footsteps, unsteady. The shuffle of bare feet on hardwood. Mia appeared in the doorway of the dining room, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon dinosaurs and clutching Professor Bun by one threadbare ear. Her face was flushed and sweaty, her eyes glassy with fever, and she was swaying slightly like a small tree in a strong wind. "Daddy," she said, "my tummy hurts." Nolan was out of his chair and moving toward her before the last word left her mouth. "Hey, baby girl, you should be in bed." "I don't want to be in bed. I want—" She stopped. Her eyes went wide. Her small body convulsed once, and then she vomited. Violently, suddenly, all over the hallway floor, all over her dinosaur pajamas, all over Professor Bun. And then her legs buckled. It happened fast. Faster than Nolan could reach her. She was standing, and then she wasn't, and in the fraction of a second between upright and falling, a hand shot out from behind him and caught Mia under the arms with a speed and precision that seemed almost mechanical. Vivian Slate was kneeling on the floor of Nolan's hallway, holding his daughter against her chest, heedless of the vomit soaking into her charcoal trench coat. Her expression had changed completely. The corporate armor, the calculated control, the Ice Queen composure. All of it had vanished in the time it took a 6-year-old to fall. What was left was something raw and unguarded and almost painful to look at. "I've got her," Vivian said, and her voice was different too, quiet, certain. The voice of someone who had held a sick child before and knew what it meant. "She's okay. I've got her." Mia looked up at Vivian with the bleary confusion of a feverish child confronted with a stranger holding her in a hallway that smelled like sick. "Who are you?" she whispered. "My name is Vivian. I work with your daddy." "You're pretty." Something flickered across Vivian's face, something that might have been surprise or might have been pain. "Thank you, sweetheart. Can you tell me where your tummy hurts?" Mia pointed vaguely at her middle. "Everywhere." Nolan was already on his knees beside them, his hand on Mia's forehead, his heart hammering in his chest. The fever was climbing again. He could feel it. The skin under his palm was dry and hot in a way that went beyond normal illness. "We need to go to the hospital," he said. "Now." He looked at Vivian. She looked back at him, and in that look something passed between them. An understanding that transcended the lawsuit threats and the server crashes and the billion-dollar mergers. Two adults in a hallway with a sick child between them, and the sudden mutual recognition that nothing else mattered until she was safe. "My car's outside," Vivian said. "My driver can get us to Seattle Children's in 12 minutes. "Us?" "I'm not leaving a child with 103 fever to go back to an office. Give me some credit, Pierce." He almost argued, almost said something about boundaries or professionalism, or the fact that 20 minutes ago she'd been threatening to freeze his bank accounts. But Mia was burning in Vivian's arms, and the look in Vivian's eyes was not the look of a CEO calculating leverage. It was the look of a human being holding a sick child. "Let me get her coat," Nolan said. "There's no time for a coat." Vivian stood up, lifting Mia with her as if she weighed nothing, and settled the girl against her hip with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. Mia, too feverish to protest, laid her head against Vivian's shoulder and closed her eyes. Nolan grabbed his phone, shoved it in his pocket, and followed Vivian out the front door into the rain. A black town car was idling at the curb. A driver in a dark suit stepped out and opened the rear door without a word, his expression revealing nothing about the sight of his boss. Soaked, vomit-stained, carrying a stranger's child, emerging from a rundown house in Ballard. Vivian slid into the back seat with Mia still in her arms. Nolan climbed in beside them. The door closed, and the car pulled away from the curb with a smoothness that his 14-year-old Honda could never have managed. "Seattle Children's," Vivian told the driver. "Emergency entrance, fastest route." "Yes, ma'am." The car accelerated. The rain hammered the roof. Mia whimpered softly against Vivian's shoulder. Nolan sat in the leather seat and tried to reconcile the woman next to him, the one gently adjusting his daughter's position to keep her comfortable, the one using the sleeve of her ruined coat to wipe sweat from a child's forehead, with the woman who had stood on his porch an hour ago and promised to ruin him. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Vivian didn't look at him. She was watching Mia's face, monitoring her breathing with an attentiveness that went beyond casual concern. "Done what?" held a sick kid. A pause. Long enough to hold an entire conversation that neither of them was ready to have. "Yes," she said. "I have." The car turned onto the freeway and the city blurred past them in streaks of gray and green in the endless, relentless rain. Nolan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Marcus again. "The system," Nolan said, the word tasting like ash. "The logic bomb." "I know," Vivian said. She was still looking at Mia. "If someone triggers it while we're at the hospital, I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket, the inner one, the dry one, and pulled out a slim device that Nolan recognized as a biometric authentication key. Military grade. The kind of thing that could bypass every security protocol in the company's infrastructure. She held it out to him. "This is my personal access key," she said. "It's linked to my biometric profile. With this, you can access the root architecture from any terminal, including your phone. You can monitor the system, disarm the bomb if you find the key, and lock out anyone who tries to touch anything." She paused. "It's also the single most sensitive piece of hardware in the company. If it falls into the wrong hands, everything I've built is compromised." Nolan stared at the device. Then he stared at her. "You're trusting me with this." "I'm trusting you with my daughter's—" She stopped, corrected herself. "I'm trusting you with your daughter's safety first, and the company second. You can do both from the hospital. I'll stay with Mia while you work." "You'll stay with her?" "Someone has to, and you'll be on your phone trying to save a collapsing infrastructure. She shouldn't be alone when she's scared." Vivian's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something underneath it, a current of feeling that she was clearly not accustomed to showing. "I may not know how to be warm, Mr. Pierce, but I know how to stay." Nolan took the biometric key. It was warm from her pocket, light in his hand, worth more than his house, his car, and every possession he owned combined. "Nolan," he said. "What?" "My name. It's Nolan. If you're going to carry my daughter through the emergency room, you should probably stop calling me Mr. Pierce." The faintest ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed Vivian's lips. It was there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "Nolan," she repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "Fine." The car pulled up to the emergency entrance of Seattle Children's Hospital. The driver was out and opening the door before the vehicle had fully stopped. Rain poured in. Vivian pulled her coat tighter around Mia, covering the child completely, shielding her from the downpour, and stepped out into the storm. Nolan watched Vivian Slate, CEO of a $4 billion company, the most feared executive in Seattle, a woman who had threatened to destroy him less than an hour ago, carry his daughter through the rain toward the bright lights of the emergency room, her designer heels splashing through puddles, her ruined coat wrapped around a 6-year-old girl in dinosaur pajamas. And something inside him shifted. Not much. Not enough to call it trust. But enough to know that whatever was coming next, the sabotage, the logic bomb, the merger, the mystery of who was trying to burn it all down, he wouldn't be facing it alone. He stepped out into the rain and followed them inside. The fluorescent lights of Seattle Children's Emergency Department hummed with the particular frequency that only hospitals seem to produce, a sound that was neither comforting nor alarming but existed in the uncomfortable space between, like a held breath that never resolved. Nolan stood at the intake desk, filling out forms with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, watching from the corner of his eye as Vivian settled into a plastic chair with Mia still curled against her chest. The waiting room was the usual Saturday morning chaos. A toddler with a bloody lip screaming in his father's arms, a teenager cradling a wrist that bent at an angle wrists weren't supposed to bend, an elderly woman in a wheelchair parked near the vending machines, staring at nothing with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime waiting in rooms like this. Nolan handed the clipboard back to the intake nurse, a tired woman with kind eyes and a lanyard covered in cartoon band-aids. She glanced at the forms, then at Nolan, then past him at Vivian and Mia. "Insurance?" she asked. I have the card somewhere." He patted his pockets. Nothing. He'd left the house with his phone and literally nothing else. No wallet, no insurance card, no ID. "Sir, without insurance information, I can still get her seen, but there will be, put it on this. Vivian's voice came from directly behind him. She'd appeared at the desk without a sound. Mia transferred to her left hip like a sleeping koala, and was holding out a black credit card with one hand while her other arm supported the child's weight. The nurse looked at the card, looked at Vivian. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, but she said nothing and processed the card without comment. You didn't have to do that, Nolan said as they moved back toward the waiting area. You left your wallet at home. Your daughter has a fever that's been climbing for 6 hours. This is not the moment for pride, Nolan. He wanted to argue. He swallowed it. They sat down. Mia shifted in Vivian's lap, her eyes opening halfway, scanning the unfamiliar room with the fuzzy alarm of a child waking up somewhere she didn't fall asleep. Where are we? She mumbled. The hospital, baby girl, Nolan said, leaning forward so she could see his face. The doctors are going to check on you and make your tummy feel better. I don't like hospitals. Nobody likes hospitals. Professor Bunn doesn't like them either. She looked down at her empty hands and her face crumpled. Where's Professor Bunn? The stuffed rabbit. Still on the hallway floor where Mia had dropped it, soaked in vomit, its remaining ear probably hanging by a thread. Nolan felt the familiar stab of parental guilt, the specific, serrated kind that comes from knowing you forgot something that matters enormously to someone very small. He's at home, sweetheart. He's resting. He's sick too? He's just resting. We'll get him when we go home. Mia's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She turned her face into Vivian's shoulder and closed her eyes again. Vivian's hand came up automatically to rest on the back of Mia's head, fingers gentle against the damp, tangled hair, and the gesture was so natural, so instinctive, that Nolan felt something catch in his throat. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then started buzzing continuously, like a trapped insect. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. 14 missed calls, 93 unread messages. The Slack channel had apparently evolved from hysteria into something resembling a digital funeral. He unlocked the phone, opened the terminal app he'd installed years ago for exactly these kinds of emergencies, and plugged Vivian's biometric key into the adapter port. The device hummed once, authenticated, and suddenly he was looking at the root architecture of Slate Dynamics' entire infrastructure. Every server, every node, every encrypted pathway, laid out on the small screen of his phone like a map of a city under siege. The logic bomb sat in the center of it all, pulsing like a heartbeat. Armed, waiting. How bad? Vivian asked. She was watching him over Mia's head, her eyes sharp. The first layer was triggered when Marcus tried the key rotation. The system's in lockdown now. Nobody can access anything, which means the bomb can't be triggered, but it also means the entire company is effectively paralyzed. He scrolled through the diagnostic data, his eyes moving in the rapid, focused pattern of someone reading code the way a musician reads sheet music. The good news is the bomb hasn't detonated. The bad news is it's on a hair trigger now. One wrong input and everything goes. Can you trace who planted it? I'm working on it. He pulled up the commit log for the patch that had been pushed 3 days ago. The authorization code was clean, a standard admin-level signature that could have belonged to any of 6 people with sufficient clearance. But Nolan knew systems the way a surgeon knows anatomy. Every coder left traces. Patterns, habits, the digital equivalent of handwriting. He started digging. Mia Pierce? A nurse stood in the doorway leading to the treatment rooms, holding a tablet and scanning the waiting area. Nolan stood up. Vivian stood up with him, Mia still in her arms. I can carry her, Nolan said, reaching out. Your hands are full. Vivian nodded at his phone, still running diagnostics, the screen alive with scrolling data. And your daughter is comfortable. Don't wake her to prove a point. She was right. He hated that she was right. They followed the nurse through the double doors and into a treatment room, painted in the aggressive cheerfulness that hospitals reserved for children. Yellow walls, a mural of cartoon fish, a ceiling covered in glow-in-the-dark stars that someone had arranged into actual constellations. Vivian laid Mia on the examination bed with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign to her body, as if her muscles weren't quite sure how to perform the motion but were giving it everything they had. Mia's eyes opened. She looked up at the glow in the dark stars. That one's Orion, she said, her voice thin but certain. Vivian looked up. How do you know that? My daddy showed me. On the roof, before he got busy. The silence that followed had weight. Nolan stared at the floor. Vivian stared at the stars. Neither of them spoke until the doctor arrived. A young woman with a ponytail and the efficient kindness of someone who dealt with scared children every day. I'm Dr. Amari. Let's take a look at this one. The examination was thorough. Temperature, blood pressure, abdominal palpation, blood draw. Mia was brave for the blood draw. She squeezed Nolan's hand so hard his knuckles went white, and she made a sound that was halfway between a whimper and a growl, like a small animal trying to be fierce. But she didn't cry. Dr. Amari praised her and gave her a sticker shaped like a rocket ship, which Mia examined with the critical eye of an art collector before sticking it to the back of Vivian's hand. For being nice, Mia explained. Vivian looked at the sticker on her hand, a cheap, shiny thing that probably cost a fraction of a cent, and something passed across her face that Nolan couldn't name. She didn't remove it. I'm going to run these labs on priority, Dr. Amari said, pulling Nolan aside while Vivian helped Mia count the glow-in-the-dark stars. Based on my initial examination, I'm thinking it could be a bacterial infection, possibly strep that's moved to the gut, which would explain the vomiting and the high fever. But I want to see the blood work before I say anything definitive. How long for results? 30 minutes, maybe 40. In the meantime, we'll get fluids started and bring her fever down with IV acetaminophen. She's dehydrated, which is making everything worse. Is she going to be okay? The question came out rawer than he intended. Dr. Amari put her hand on his arm. She's going to be fine. She's tough. I can tell. She paused. When was her last well-child visit? The question hit like a slap. Nolan opened his mouth, closed it, and felt the answer burning in his chest before it reached his lips. I don't remember, he said. It's okay, Dr. Amari said, and she meant it. He could tell. No judgment. Just a doctor who had seen 1,000 overwhelmed parents and understood that guilt was neither useful nor necessary. We'll get her sorted out. You can stay with her the whole time. The nurse came back to start the IV. Mia, who had been brave for the blood draw, was decidedly less brave for the needle that would stay in her arm. Her small face screwed up, and she reached for Nolan, but Nolan's phone chose that exact moment to erupt with a call from Marcus that he could not ignore. Go, Vivian said. She was already moving to the bedside, already taking Mia's hand, already lowering herself to eye level with the child. I've got her. Nolan hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped into the hallway and answered the phone. Tell me you haven't touched anything, he said. We haven't, but Nolan, the board is calling an emergency session. They want answers, and there's something else. Marcus's voice dropped. Graham Crow is here. Nolan went still. Graham Crow, 63 years old, founding board member, old-school coder who'd been writing assembly language when Nolan was still in diapers. He'd been one of the original architects of Slate Dynamics back when it was a 3-person startup in a garage, and he'd been on the board ever since, a permanent fixture, like the company logo or the coffee machines on every floor. Nolan had always found Crow unsettling, not because of anything specific. The man was polite, methodical, always prepared. He wore the same style of charcoal suit to every meeting. He asked detailed technical questions that proved he still understood the systems he'd helped build. He called everyone by their first name and remembered their children's birthdays. But there was something behind it all, something watchful, something that reminded Nolan of the way a spider sits at the center of its web, patient, still, aware of every vibration. What's Crow doing there on a Saturday? Nolan asked. Bussin'. He says he heard about the system failure and came in to help. But Nolan, he's asking questions, specific questions, about the authentication bridge, about the encryption layer, about the failover protocols, the kind of questions you only ask if you already know the answers. Nolan leaned against the hospital wall and closed his eyes. The pieces were starting to arrange themselves in his mind. Not a complete picture yet, but the edges were forming, the outline of something ugly taking shape. Marcus, listen to me carefully. I need you to pull the access logs for the last 90 days. Every admin level login, Every system modification, every patch authorization. I need timestamps and IP addresses. Can you do that without touching the main system? The logs are mirrored to the backup analytics server. That's separate from the main architecture. Good. Pull everything and send it to my personal email. Not company email, personal. And Marcus, don't tell anyone you're doing it, especially not Crow. Nolan, what the hell is going on? I'm not sure yet, but I think someone on the inside built this bomb, and I think they built it for a reason that has nothing to do with crashing the merger. He ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the ambient sounds of the hospital, the beeping of monitors, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant sound of a child laughing somewhere down the corridor. Then he looked through the window of Mia's treatment room. Vivian was sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed, her ruined coat draped over the back. She was wearing what she'd had on underneath, a charcoal silk blouse, now wrinkled and stained, tucked into tailored trousers, and she was holding Mia's hand while the nurse finished securing the IV. She was talking to Mia in a low, steady voice that Nolan couldn't hear through the glass, and Mia was looking up at her with the particular expression children reserve for adults who are treating them like actual people, rather than small problems to be managed. Vivian said something. Mia laughed, a weak, watery laugh, but a laugh nonetheless, and the sound traveled through the glass and hit Nolan in a place he hadn't known was still vulnerable. He walked back into the room. How is she? Fluids are going in, Vivian said without looking up. The nurse said she should start feeling better within the hour. She's also informed me that the stars on the ceiling are not astronomically accurate, which I believe she considers a personal offense. They put Polaris in the wrong place, Mia said, with the righteous indignation of a 6-year-old who took her constellations seriously. Your father taught you well, Vivian said, and this time she did look at Nolan, and the expression in her eyes was something he couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition, or the complex arithmetic of a woman recalculating her assumptions about a man she'd been prepared to destroy 12 hours ago. I need to show you something, Nolan said, pulling up the terminal on his phone. I'm starting to see a pattern in the system logs, and I don't think you're going to like it. Vivian's expression shifted instantly, the softness retreating behind the analytical precision that had built an empire. She stood, glanced at Mia, who was now drowsily watching the IV drip with the fascination children bring to anything medical, and moved to stand beside Nolan near the window, their voices low enough to stay between them. Talk, she said. The patch that was pushed 3 days ago, the one with the hidden key change and the logic bomb, was authorized using an admin credential. There are 6 people in the company with that level of access. You, me, Marcus, your CTO, Rebecca Hale, your head of security, David Park, and Graham Crow. I didn't do it. You didn't do it. Marcus clearly didn't do it, given his panic level. Rebecca is on vacation in Portugal and has been for 2 weeks. David Park doesn't have the coding skill to build a logic bomb. He's a policy guy, not an engineer. Vivian's jaw tightened. That leaves Crow. It's not just process of elimination. I'm looking at the code itself, the structure of the logic bomb, the way it's nested inside the patch, the naming conventions and the subroutines. Every coder has a style, Vivian. It's like handwriting, and this code reads like someone who learned to program in the 80s and never fully modernized. Old school architecture. Elegant, but dated. The kind of work someone produces when they've been writing code for 40 years and couldn't change their habits if they tried. Crow taught himself to code on a Commodore 64, Vivian said quietly. He brags about it at every board dinner. There's more. Marcus is pulling the full access logs, but from what I can see on the diagnostic side, the admin credential that authorized the patch was used from an external IP address. Not the office, not a VPN. Someone logged in from outside the network. Can you trace the IP? Not from my phone. I'd need a proper terminal and about an hour to run the trace. But here's what's bothering me more than the IP. Nolan lowered his voice further. The logic bomb isn't designed to destroy the company. It's designed to destroy evidence. Vivian went very still, the kind of still that preceded either insight or violence. Explain, she said. The data purge targets specific directories, not all of them. That would be too obvious. It targets financial records from the last 18 months, board communication archives, and a particular subset of transaction logs tied to offshore accounts. Nolan watched her face as the implications landed. Someone has been moving money, Vivian, and they built this bomb to make sure nobody could ever prove it. The color drained from Vivian's face slowly, like watching a tide go out. She turned to the window and stared at the rain, her reflection ghostly in the glass. A woman confronting the possibility that someone she'd trusted for over a decade had been stealing from her while sitting in her boardroom. "How much?" she asked. "I can't see the amounts yet. Not without accessing the financial directories, which I can't do without triggering the bomb. But based on the size of the directories being targeted and the date range, 18 months of transaction logs from accounts that shouldn't exist, we're not talking about someone skimming petty cash." "Crow has been on the board since the beginning," Vivian said, and her voice had a quality Nolan hadn't heard before. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper and more corrosive. Betrayal. "He was there when I wrote my first business plan on a napkin. He was there when we got our Series A. He stood up at my wedding and gave a toast about loyalty." She stopped, caught herself. The mask slid back into place, but not as smoothly as before. Nolan could see the cracks now, the places where the armor didn't quite fit. "Your wedding?" he asked carefully. "That's not relevant." "Okay." "It's not." I said okay. They stood in silence for a moment, two people standing closer than either of them had expected to be standing 24 hours ago, separated by a gulf of circumstance and connected by a crisis neither of them had chosen. Mia's voice drifted from the bed. "Daddy, the stars are spinning." Nolan was at her side instantly. Her eyes were half closed, and she was looking at the ceiling with the glassy, dreamy expression of a child whose fever was doing strange things to her perception. "That's just the medicine working, baby girl. Close your eyes." "If I close my eyes, will they stop spinning?" "They'll slow down, I promise." "Okay." She closed her eyes, then opened one. "Is the pretty lady still here?" Nolan glanced at Vivian, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed and her face unreadable. "Yeah, she's still here." "Good. She smells nice." Nolan almost laughed. Almost. Then his phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. The access logs he'd requested, compressed into a file that his phone would struggle to open properly. "I need a real computer," he said to Vivian. "This phone isn't going to cut it for the trace work." "The hospital has a business center on the second floor. Computers, printers, the works." She paused. "Donor perks. I funded the pediatric wing renovation 3 years ago." He stared at her. "You funded? Don't read into it. It was a tax strategy." Her tone made it clear this was not a subject she intended to discuss further. "Go. Use the business center. I'll stay with Mia." "Vivian, if you say you don't have to do this, I'm going to remind you that I have a $4.2 billion merger collapsing in real time and an apparent embezzler on my board, and sitting beside a child watching IV fluid drip is currently the most productive thing I can do because it frees you to fix both problems. This isn't charity. This is resource allocation." Nolan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Mia, who had fallen into a light sleep, her small chest rising and falling evenly, her hand still resting near where Vivian had been holding it. "If she wakes up and she's scared, I will hold her hand, tell her the correct location of Polaris, and inform her that her father is nearby and coming right back. I am not completely without the capacity for human warmth, despite what the Glassdoor reviews suggest." This time, Nolan did laugh. A short, surprise sound that escaped before he could stop it. Vivian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. And for a moment, the space between them felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like a temporary ceasefire that neither of them fully trusted, but both of them needed. He took his phone, the biometric key, and the access logs, and he went to find the business center. It took him 47 minutes. The business center was a small, well-appointed room on the second floor with 3 desktop computers, a printer, and a coffee machine that produced something approximating espresso. Nolan plugged in, opened the access logs, and started tracing the admin credential through 90 days of data. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. The admin credential, the one used to authorize the sabotaged patch, had been accessed 17 times in the past 3 months from external IP addresses. Nolan ran each address through a geolocation database, and the results painted a picture that made his stomach turn. 14 of the 17 logins originated from the same location, a hotel in downtown Seattle. Not just any hotel, the Four Seasons. Specifically, the business center on the lobby level, which offered complimentary Wi-Fi to guests, and crucially, did not require room key authentication for network access. Anyone could walk in, sit down, and use the connection. The remaining 3 logins came from a different location, a residential IP address in Mercer Island, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the Seattle metro area. Nolan ran the address through a public records database and felt the final piece click into place with the sickening certainty of a lock engaging. The IP address was registered to the home network of Graham Crowe. He dug deeper. The transaction logs that the logic bomb was designed to destroy, he couldn't access them directly, but the backup analytics server maintained metadata about file modifications, and that metadata told a story. Over the past 18 months, someone had been creating and modifying financial records in a directory labeled Project Lighthouse. The directory had been created with Crowe's admin credentials. The modifications followed a regular pattern. Updates every 2 weeks, always on a Thursday, always between 2 and 4 a.m. And Project Lighthouse didn't appear in any official company documentation. No board minutes, no project management system, no budget allocation. It was a ghost, existing inside the infrastructure but invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Nolan pulled up the metadata for the shell accounts referenced in the transaction logs. The naming conventions were clinical, anonymous, strings of numbers and letters that meant nothing on their surface. But buried in the metadata was a registration detail that someone had been careless enough to leave unencrypted, a beneficiary name on one of the offshore accounts, Lighthouse Holdings, LLC, and the registered agent for Lighthouse Holdings, as listed in Delaware corporate records that Nolan found through a simple web search, was a law firm that had exactly one other client of note in its public filings. Graham Crowe. Nolan leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The evidence was there, not yet solid enough for a courtroom, but solid enough to see the shape of what Crowe had built. A shell company. Offshore accounts. Regular transfers disguised inside the company's infrastructure. And when the merger threatened to bring in outside auditors who would inevitably discover the discrepancies, Crowe had done what cornered animals do. He'd set a trap. The logic bomb wasn't just designed to destroy evidence. It was designed to create chaos. The kind of chaos that would give Crowe cover to blame the system failure on someone else. And who better to blame than the burned-out engineer who had just quit in the middle of a crisis, or the CEO whose company was falling apart on her watch. Nolan gathered everything, screenshots, metadata, IP traces, corporate filings, and compiled it into a single encrypted file. Then he walked back to Mia's room. He found Vivian exactly where he'd left her, sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed. But something had changed. Mia was awake, sitting up slightly, and she was showing Vivian something on the back of a hospital menu, a drawing she'd made with a pen she'd apparently liberated from the nurse's station. Vivian was leaning in, examining the drawing with an expression of genuine concentration. "That's you," Mia was saying, pointing to a stick figure with very long hair. "And that's Daddy, and that's Professor Bunn. He's in the hospital too because he got sick at the same time as me, which is a coincidence." "A remarkable coincidence," Vivian agreed. "And that's the stars, the right stars, not the wrong ones on the ceiling." "I can see that. Your Orion is much more accurate." Mia beamed. It was the first real smile Nolan had seen on her face in 2 days, and it hit him with a force that had nothing to do with the case he'd just built. "Hey, baby girl," he said from the doorway. "How are you feeling?" "Better." The lady doctor came back and said, "My blood is fighting the bad germs, and the bad germs are losing." "That's great news." "Also, Vivian knows all the constellations, even the ones you don't know. Is that right?" Nolan looked at Vivian, who shrugged one shoulder in a gesture that was almost shy. "I had a telescope as a child," she said. "The sky was the one thing I could study without anyone having an opinion about it." There was a story behind that sentence. Nolan could feel it. heavy and private and layered with implications he didn't have the right to unpack. He let it pass. Dr. Amari came back with the full results about 20 minutes ago, Vivian said, shifting into her reporting voice. Streptococcal infection that migrated to the gastrointestinal tract. Bacterial, not viral, which means antibiotics will knock it out quickly. They're starting her on amoxicillin through the IV now and sending her home with an oral course. The fever should break within 12 hours. She's going to be fine? She's going to be fine. Vivian held his gaze. She's tough. She gets it from somewhere. Nolan swallowed hard and turned to the window so Mia wouldn't see his eyes. He stood there for a moment, breathing, letting the relief wash through him in waves that made his knees feel unreliable. Then he turned back and held up his phone. We need to talk. Vivian read his expression and nodded. She stood, smoothed her wrinkled blouse, and turned to Mia. Your father and I need to discuss some very boring adult things right outside the door. Can you watch the stars for us and make sure they don't move? They're on the ceiling. They can't move. Exactly. That's why you're the perfect person for the job. Mia considered this logic, found it satisfactory, and settled back against her pillow with the gravity of someone accepting a critical mission. In the hallway, Nolan showed Vivian everything. The IP traces, the metadata, the shell company, the registered agent. He spoke quickly, quietly, watching her face as each piece of evidence landed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She absorbed it all with the focused stillness of someone building a structure in their mind, placing each fact like a brick, mortaring it with implication, stepping back to see the whole. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. 18 months, she finally said. He's been stealing from me for 18 months. At minimum, the metadata only goes back that far. The actual theft could have started earlier. And the logic bomb is his insurance policy. If the merger brings auditors, the bomb destroys the evidence. And the chaos of the system failure gives him cover to pin the blame on someone else. On you, Nolan said. Or on me, or both. The sabotage is designed to look like either a disgruntled employee or an incompetent CEO. Either way, Crow walks away clean while the rest of us burn. Vivian pressed her back against the hospital wall and looked at the ceiling. Not at glow-in-the-dark stars this time, but at plain white acoustic tile. And Nolan watched something shift behind her eyes. Not defeat, not despair. Something harder. Something that looked like the moment a general stops retreating and starts planning a counterattack. We can't go to the board, she said. Not yet. Crow has allies there. He's been cultivating them for years. Dinners, golf, favors. If we bring accusations without bulletproof evidence, he'll spin it as a coup attempt. He'll say I'm trying to eliminate a founding member to consolidate power. The evidence I have is strong but circumstantial. IP traces can be disputed. Metadata can be questioned. The shell company connection is solid, but a good lawyer could argue coincidence. Then we need more. Vivian's eyes locked onto his. We need the actual financial records, the transaction amounts, the account numbers, the money trail. Those records are inside the directories the logic bomb is protecting. To access them, I need to disarm the bomb. To disarm the bomb, I need the new encryption key. And to find the key, you need to think like Crow. I need to think like a man who's been planning this for over a year. The password will be personal. Something meaningful to him. Something he'd remember under pressure, but that nobody else would guess. Vivian was quiet, thinking. Then she said, come back to the house. When Mia is discharged, I'll tell you everything I know about Graham Crow. Every detail, every habit, every conversation I remember. And we'll find that password. Nolan looked through the window at his daughter, who had fallen asleep with the hospital menu drawing clutched in one hand and a pen in the other, her small face finally peaceful, the flush in her cheeks fading as the antibiotics began their work. She can't stay here alone, he said. She won't. She's coming with us. The doctor said she can be discharged in 2 hours as long as the fever responds to treatment. We'll bring her home, put her to bed, and work from your kitchen. My kitchen is a disaster. I've seen your kitchen. Everything about your house is a disaster. That's not going to stop me. He almost smiled. Almost. The exhaustion was catching up to him now. The adrenaline of the morning was metabolizing into something heavy and slow. and his body was reminding him that he'd slept 4 hours in the last 48. "Vivian," he said, and something about the way he said her name made her go still. "Why are you doing this? And don't say resource allocation." She looked at him. The hallway was quiet around them, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of monitors and the rain still falling against the windows, always the rain, relentless and gray and everywhere. "Because 12 years ago," she said, and her voice was careful in a way that suggested she was choosing each word like someone choosing steps across thin ice. "I was 30 years old and I had just closed my first major deal. Biggest day of my career, and I got a phone call from a hospital that sounded exactly like this one, telling me that someone I loved was sick, and I chose the deal. I sat in a conference room and signed papers while—" She stopped, looked away. The muscle in her jaw was working, and her hands were clasped in front of her so tightly the knuckles had gone white. "I chose the deal," she repeated, "and I've spent 12 years making sure no one ever sees what that cost me. So when I watched you choose your daughter this morning, when I watched you walk away from the biggest crisis of your career because a 6-year-old needed you, I didn't see a man having a breakdown. I saw something I haven't seen in a very long time." "What?" "The right answer." She straightened. The mask was settling back into place, layer by layer, but the cracks were still visible if you knew where to look. "Now, are we going to stop a thief and save my company, or are we going to stand in a hospital hallway having feelings?" Nolan looked at her, really looked at her, and what he saw was not the Ice Queen of Seattle Tech, not the terrifying CEO on his porch, not the corporate machine that had threatened to ruin him. What he saw was a woman who had made a choice she couldn't undo, who had built an empire on top of a wound she couldn't heal, and who was standing in a children's hospital in a vomit-stained blouse offering to help a man she barely knew because his daughter reminded her of something she'd lost. "Both," he said. "We're going to do both." Vivian almost smiled. It was closer than before, close enough that he could see what her face might look like if she ever let the smile fully arrive. "Then let's get your daughter home," she said, and turned back toward the room where Mia slept beneath incorrect stars, dreaming of rabbits and constellations, and the particular safety of knowing that, for once, everyone she needed was close enough to touch. The drive back to Ballard was quieter than the drive to the hospital had been. Mia slept in the back seat, her head resting against Vivian's shoulder, her breathing steady and easy in a way it hadn't been that morning. The fever had broken somewhere around the 3rd hour of IV antibiotics, and Dr. Amari had discharged her with a prescription, a follow-up appointment, and instructions to rest and drink plenty of fluids. Nolan sat in the front passenger seat, watching the rain stream down the windows and thinking about passwords. The new encryption key, the one Crow had planted. It would be something personal. That's how these things always worked. People who built traps built them with keys they could remember under pressure, which meant the key would be connected to something meaningful. A date, a name, a phrase that held significance only to the person who chose it. The problem was that Nolan didn't know Graham Crow. He knew the professional version, the polished board member, the founding architect, the elder statesman of Seattle Tech. But that version was a performance, a mask. The real Crow was somewhere underneath, and to find the password, Nolan would have to find the man. The car pulled up to his house, and the driver, who had not said a single unnecessary word during the entire day, came around to open the door. Nolan climbed out first, then reached back in to lift Mia from Vivian's arms. She stirred but didn't wake, her small fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt as he carried her through the rain to the front porch. Vivian followed. She paused on the porch, looking at the sagging wood and the broken gutter and the dented mailbox, and Nolan could practically see her calculating the repair costs. "Don't," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were thinking it. Thinking is not a crime." She stepped inside, and whatever she thought of the interior, the mail towers, the coffee mugs, the general chaos of a life lived in crisis mode, she kept it off her face. "Kitchen?" "Through there." Nolan carried Mia to her bedroom, tucked her into bed with the covers pulled up to her chin, and found Professor Bunn still lying on the hallway floor where Mia had dropped him. The rabbit was stiff and crusty with dried vomit, but Nolan picked him up anyway and set him on Mia's dresser where she could see him when she woke up. "I'll wash him," he whispered to her sleeping form. "He'll be good as new." He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe, and felt the weight of the day settle around him like a second skin. 12 hours ago, he'd been sitting at his desk, ignoring Slack messages while his daughter burned with fever in the next room. Now she was safe. The fever was breaking, and somehow, through circumstances he still couldn't fully explain, he was about to spend the evening hunting for evidence with the CEO of the company he'd quit. The universe had a strange sense of humor. In the kitchen, Vivian had already cleared a space on the table. The pizza boxes had been stacked in a corner. The coffee mugs had been relocated to the sink. The cables were coiled and set aside, and in their place was Nolan's laptop, open and humming, along with a legal pad and 3 pens that Vivian had apparently produced from the depths of her designer bag. She was standing at the counter, studying the coffee maker with the intensity of someone analyzing a hostile corporate acquisition. "Does this device actually function?" she asked. "Sometimes, if you hit it on the left side." She hit it on the left side. It sputtered to life. "Remarkable. The trick is knowing where to hit." "That's true of most things." She poured 2 cups of what emerged, a substance that was technically coffee, in the same way that a picture of fire was technically warm, and set one in front of him at the table. "Now, tell me exactly what we need." Nolan sat down, pulled the laptop toward him, and began walking her through the architecture of the problem. The logic bomb was armed and waiting. Any attempt to access the protected directories would trigger a data purge. To disarm it, he needed to enter the correct encryption key on the first try. No second chances, no trial and error. The key could be anything. A word, a phrase, a combination of letters and numbers. But it would be something that meant something to Crow. Something personal. "What do you know about his personal life?" Nolan asked. "Family, hobbies, important dates?" Vivian sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug, her eyes focused on some middle distance. "Graham never married. No children. He has a sister in Portland, but they're estranged. He mentioned it once, years ago, at a company dinner. Something about an inheritance dispute after their father died." "Father's name?" "I don't know. I never asked." "When did the father die?" "Early 90s, I think, before the company was founded." She paused. Graham used to talk about his father sometimes, reverently. The man was apparently some kind of small-town business legend, owned a chain of hardware stores across the Pacific Northwest. Graham idolized him. Nolan made a note. Fathers and father figures were common password material, dates of death, nicknames, inside references that carried emotional weight. "What about the hardware stores? Did they have a name?" Vivian frowned, searching her memory. "Crow and Sons, I think. Or maybe Crow Hardware. Something straightforward." "And the sister's name?" "Margaret. No, Martha. Something with an M." Nolan wrote it down. Sisters could be significant, especially estranged ones. Sometimes the things people were most ashamed of were the things they couldn't stop thinking about. "What else? What does he do outside of work?" "Golf. He's obsessive about it. Plays every Sunday at Broadmoor, same tee time for 15 years. He also collects antique watches. He has a Patek Philippe that he wears to board meetings, and he mentions it at least once per meeting." "Model number?" "He never shuts up about it, so yes. It's a reference 2499. Second series, apparently. He paid almost $3 million for it at a Christie's auction." Nolan typed the model number into his notes. Expensive watches often carried registration numbers, purchase dates, auction lot numbers. Any of those could be password material. "What about enemies, people who wronged him?" Vivian's expression darkened. "Graham holds grudges. There was a man, a former business partner, who tried to push him out of a deal in the 80s. Graham never forgave him. He spent 5 years systematically destroying the man's career, and when the man finally filed for bankruptcy, Graham sent him a bottle of champagne. Name? Richard something. Richardson? Richards? She shook her head. I can look it up. We probably have old corporate filings that reference it. Do that later. Right now, keep going. They talked for 2 hours. Vivian recalled every conversation she could remember having with Graham Crow over the past 12 years. The details emerged slowly, like objects rising from murky water. A mention of a childhood dog named Captain, a favorite restaurant in San Francisco that had closed years ago. A college roommate who became a famous economist. A summer spent working on a fishing boat in Alaska before he started his first company. Nolan cataloged everything. He built a profile of Graham Crowe that went deeper than any LinkedIn page or board biography. A portrait of a man shaped by a domineering father, an estranged sister, a lifetime of careful grudges and calculated moves. A man who saw the world as a chessboard and everyone in it as pieces to be positioned. He's methodical, Nolan said, staring at his notes. Everything about him is planned, even the grudges, even the revenge. That's what makes him dangerous, Vivian said. He doesn't act impulsively. He waits. He positions. He strikes when you're looking the other direction. Then the password won't be random. It'll be meaningful. Something connected to his self-image. Something that represents how he sees himself. Which is how? Nolan looked up from his notes. You've known him for 12 years. How does Graham Crowe see himself? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. The rain drummed against the kitchen windows. The coffee maker gurgled as it kept the pot warm, a sound like the house itself was breathing. As the rightful heir, she said finally. He's always believed he should have been the one to run this company. He was there at the founding. He wrote the original code. He brought in the first investors. But when we restructured and brought in outside leadership, the board chose me instead of him. He smiled and congratulated me and said all the right things, but I've always known he never accepted it. He sees me as someone who stole what was supposed to be his. Then the password might be about that, about reclaiming what he thinks he deserves. But he's been stealing for 18 months. That's before the merger was announced, before there was any outside pressure. Unless the merger wasn't the trigger. Nolan leaned back in his chair, thinking out loud. What if Crowe was already planning something? The shell company, the offshore accounts, that takes time to set up. He didn't build that in response to a crisis. He built it as a foundation, a parachute. The logic bomb is just the emergency exit. You think he was planning to leave? I think he was planning to take as much as he could and disappear before anyone noticed. The merger just forced his timeline. Suddenly there would be auditors crawling through every financial record in the company. So he accelerated, planted the bomb, created a fail-safe that would destroy the evidence if anyone got close. Vivian's jaw tightened. That arrogant son of a... Daddy? The small voice came from the kitchen doorway. Mia stood there in her dinosaur pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, her eyes still slightly glassy from the fever. She was holding Professor Bunn by his one remaining ear, seemingly unbothered by the fact that he was crusty and stiff and badly in need of a washing machine. Hey, baby girl! Nolan was on his feet immediately, crossing the kitchen to kneel in front of her. You should be sleeping. I woke up. My tummy feels better. She looked past him at Vivian. You're still here. I'm still here, Vivian said. Why? Your daddy and I are working on a project. What kind of project? The boring kind. Numbers and computers? Mia considered this. I like computers, but not numbers. Numbers are hard. I agree completely. Nolan touched Mia's forehead. The fever was down, not gone, but significantly lower than it had been. The antibiotics were doing their job. Are you hungry? I can make you some toast. Can I have soup? We might have some soup. Can I eat it out here? I don't want to be in my room alone. Nolan looked at Vivian. She gave the smallest shrug, which he interpreted as not my house. Sure, baby. Let me see what we have. He found a can of chicken noodle soup in a cabinet that he'd forgotten existed, heated it up on a stove that required strategic burner selection due to two of them being permanently broken, and set a bowl in front of Mia at the kitchen table. She ate slowly, her eyes moving between the soup and Vivian and the laptop screen and back again, taking in everything with the quiet intensity that children bring to adult spaces. Vivian watched her eat. There was something in her expression that Nolan couldn't quite name. Something soft and sharp at the same time, like a wound that had healed wrong and still ached in certain weather. Professor Bunn needs a bath, Mia announced between spoonfuls of soup. I know, I'll wash him tonight. His ear is falling off again. I noticed. Can you fix it? I can try, baby. I'm not very good at sewing, but I'll try. Mia nodded, accepting this. Then she looked at Vivian. Can you fix things? What kind of things? Like Professor Bunn. His ear keeps falling off because it's been sewn too many times. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, May I see him? Mia held out the rabbit. Vivian took it carefully, turning it over in her hands, examining the seams and the worn fabric and the ear that was hanging by 3 threads. Her fingers moved with surprising precision, assessing the damage. The problem is the fabric, she said. It's too worn to hold stitches in the same place. You need to reinforce the base before you reattach the ear. Can you do that? I would need a needle, thread, and a small piece of fabric for patching. Daddy has a sewing kit. It's in the bathroom. Grammy gave it to him, but he never uses it. Mia, Nolan said, but Vivian was already standing. Where's the bathroom? You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She was looking at him with an expression that dared him to argue. But your daughter's rabbit needs surgery, and I happen to be qualified. She left the kitchen before he could respond. Mia watched her go with something like wonder. She's intense, Mia said. Nolan almost choked on his coffee. Where did you learn that word? School. My teacher says I'm intense too. She says it like it's bad, but I don't think it's bad. It's not bad, baby. It just means you pay attention. Vivian pays attention. Yes, she does. Vivian returned with the sewing kit, a small plastic container that his mother had given him years ago and that he had never opened, and sat back down at the table. She threaded a needle with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times before, selected a scrap of fabric from the kit that was close enough in color to Professor Bunn's matted fur, and began to work. Mia abandoned her soup to watch. Her eyes were fixed on Vivian's hands, tracking every stitch with rapt attention. Where did you learn to sew? Mia asked. My grandmother taught me. She was a seamstress. What's a seamstress? Someone who makes clothes, or fixes them. She had a little shop in a town called Spokane, and when I was about your age, I used to sit under her sewing table and watch her work. Did she make you clothes? She made me everything. Dresses, coats, even a costume for Halloween once. I wanted to be a princess, but not a regular princess. I wanted to be a princess from space. Mia's eyes went wide. A space princess? With a cape and silver boots and a crown made of aluminum foil. Vivian's voice had softened without her seeming to notice. It was the best costume in my whole school. Everyone wanted to know where I got it. What did you tell them? I told them my grandmother was magic. Mia smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes, and Nolan felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent 4 years watching his daughter interact with adults who talked down to her, who smiled fake smiles and asked fake questions, who saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known. He'd gotten used to being the only person who really saw her, but Vivian was seeing her, not performing, seeing. The stitching your father tried to do was actually quite creative, Vivian said, examining her work. He used what appears to be dental floss and some kind of packing tape. That was from when Professor Bunn fell in the toilet. I see. Daddy said a bad word when that happened. I'm sure he did. Nolan covered his face with his hands. Can we please talk about something else? But this is the most interesting conversation we've had all day. Vivian made a final stitch, examined it critically, and then bit the thread to sever it. She held up the rabbit, turning it so Mia could see. The ear was reattached. Not just reattached, but reinforced with a small patch that blended almost seamlessly into the existing fabric. It looked better than it had looked in years. Professor Bunn, Mia breathed, taking him back with reverent hands. You fixed him. He's not perfect. The fabric is still old. But he should hold together for a while longer. Thank you. Mia clutched the rabbit to her chest and looked at Vivian with an expression that was somehow both fierce and vulnerable. You're nice. I'm not typically described that way. Well, you are. To me. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, and looked away. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, Nolan saw something break through the surface of her control. Something raw. something that looked like grief. Then it was gone, and she was reaching for the laptop, pulling it toward her, scanning the notes they'd compiled. "We should get back to work," she said. "The board meeting is in 14 hours. Mia yawned. The excitement of Professor Bunn's resurrection was giving way to the undertow of exhaustion and lingering illness. "Come on, baby girl," Nolan said, standing. "Back to bed." "Can Vivian tuck me in?" The question hung in the air. Nolan looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Mia. Something passed between them that didn't require words. "If that's all right with your father," Vivian said. Nolan nodded. The three of them walked to Mia's bedroom, Nolan leading, Mia in the middle clutching Professor Bunn, Vivian following with the careful steps of someone entering a space she wasn't sure she belonged. Mia climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, arranging Professor Bunn beside her on the pillow. Vivian stood at the edge of the bed, uncertain for the first time since she'd arrived. The commanding CEO had disappeared. In her place was something younger and less defended, a woman who knew how to run a company but maybe not how to comfort a child. "Will you come back?" Mia asked. "After you finish the boring numbers?" "I don't know. Maybe." "You should. Daddy gets lonely." "Mia," Nolan said from the doorway. "What?" "He does. He talks to the computer more than he talks to people." Vivian looked at Nolan. There was something in her eyes that might have been amusement or might have been understanding. "Get some sleep," she told Mia. "And if the stars on your ceiling are in the wrong place, just close your eyes and put them where they belong." "That's what I do," Mia said. "I fix them in my head." "Smart girl." Vivian stepped back. Nolan leaned down and kissed Mia's forehead, checking her temperature out of habit. Still warm, but nowhere near as hot as it had been that morning. A lifetime ago. Another world. "I love you, baby." "Love you too, Daddy. Don't work too late." "I won't." "You always say that." "I know." He turned off the light and left the door open a crack. And together he and Vivian walked back to the kitchen, leaving the warmth of the small bedroom behind and stepping back into the cold clarity of the work that still needed to be done. They worked through the night. The rain continued to fall, relentless, as if it had been raining since the beginning of time and would keep raining until the end. The coffee grew cold, was reheated, grew cold again. The legal pad filled with notes, crossed out, rewrites, crossed out again. Nolan's laptop hummed and clicked as he ran search after search, trying to find the pattern that would unlock the password. They tried everything. The father's name, William Crow. William, 1932. William Crow. Crow and Sons. Crow son. Nothing. The sister's name, Martha. Martha C. Martha Crow. Martha Crow. 1961. Martha. Martha, 1961. Nothing. The watch, Patek Philippe. Reference 2499. Christie. 2019. 2,499. Second. 3 million different combinations. Nothing. The childhood dog. Captain. Captain Crow. Good boy, Captain. Captain. 1970. Nothing. The college roommate, the fishing boat, the hardware stores, the favorite restaurant. They tried variations of everything Vivian could remember, in every format Nolan could think of. Uppercase. Lowercase. Numbers substituted for letters. Dates in American format, European format, reversed, abbreviated. Nothing. 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 By 3 a.m, Nolan's eyes were burning and his mind was starting to fold in on itself. He pushed back from the table and rubbed his face with both hands. "We're missing something," he said. "Clearly. It's not random. It has to mean something to him. Something we're not seeing." Vivian was staring at the legal pad, her brow furrowed, her lipstick long since worn away, and her hair escaping from its careful arrangement in wisps that softened the severity of her face. "What if it's not about his past?" she said slowly. "What if it's about his future?" "What do you mean?" "We've been looking at things he's attached to, family, possessions, memories. But Graham is a planner. He thinks 3 moves ahead. What if the password isn't about where he's been? It's about where he's going." Nolan sat up straighter. The shell company, Lighthouse Holdings. Why did he call it Lighthouse? You tell me. Vivian was quiet, thinking. A lighthouse is a guide, a beacon, something that shows you the way home. She looked up. Graham used to talk about retiring, about buying a house somewhere warm and spending his last years on a beach. He always said he was going to, what was the phrase, sail into the sunset like his father never got to. His father died young? Heart attack at 53. Graham is 63 now. He's already outlived his father by a decade, but I don't think that brings him comfort. I think it reminds him that time is running out. Nolan's mind was racing. Lighthouses, sunsets, retirement. A man who had spent his whole life in his father's shadow, building something just to watch someone else take credit for it. What was the father's birthday? He asked. I have no idea. What year did the hardware stores open? Early 60s, maybe? I'm not sure. What about the lighthouse? Did Graham ever mention a specific one? A place he wanted to go, a memory he associated with the word? Vivian went still. Her face changed, the color draining slightly, the muscles around her eyes tightening in the way that happened when someone was remembering something they'd forgotten they knew. There was a photograph, she said, in his office. I only saw it once, years ago, when I went in to get a signature while he was away. It was in his desk drawer. I wasn't snooping, I just needed a pen. And I saw it. A photograph of a man and a boy standing in front of a lighthouse. His father and him? I assumed so. The boy was wearing a t-shirt that said Point No Point on it. Point No Point? It's a lighthouse, north of here, on the Kitsap Peninsula. I only remember it because the name struck me as absurd. A point that's not a point. Nolan typed it into his search bar. Point No Point Lighthouse. Built in 1879. Located in Hansville, Washington. The oldest lighthouse on Puget Sound. It fits, he said. Personal, meaningful, connected to his father, and obscure enough that no one would guess it. Try it. He pulled up the terminal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. One shot, one try. If he was wrong, the logic bomb would trigger and everything would be gone. The evidence, the financial records, the proof of everything Crow had done. Point No Point, he typed. No spaces, no numbers. He hit enter. The screen went dark. For 3 of the longest seconds of Nolan's life, nothing happened. The terminal was blank. The laptop fan whirred. The rain hammered the windows like an audience drumming their fingers, impatient for the reveal. Then text began to scroll across the screen. Green on black. Line after line of code, cascading down faster than he could read. Logic bomb disarmed. Encryption key accepted. Protected directories unlocked. Access granted. Nolan exhaled so hard he felt it in his spine. We're in, he said. Vivian was already out of her chair, coming around the table to look over his shoulder. The screen was filling with file names now. Financial records, transaction logs, communication archives. 18 months of evidence, preserved and accessible. Pull up the transactions, she said. I want to see the amounts. Nolan navigated to the directory labeled Project Lighthouse and opened the first file. What he saw made his stomach drop. The numbers were larger than he'd expected. Much larger. Over the past 18 months, Graham Crow had transferred a total of $47 million from Slate Dynamics to offshore accounts controlled by Lighthouse Holdings. The transfers were disguised as vendor payments, consulting fees, and equipment purchases, all for companies that didn't exist. $47 million, Vivian said, and her voice was flat in the way that voices go flat when the emotions underneath them are too big to let out. It gets worse. Nolan was scrolling through the communications archive now, emails between Crow and a lawyer at the offshore firm discussing strategy. He's been planning to disappear. Look at this. He bought property in Costa Rica 6 months ago. Beach house, gated community, under a holding company registered in the Caymans. He was going to run. He was going to burn the evidence and run and blame the whole thing on you. Look, Nolan pulled up an email dated 2 weeks ago. He's been feeding information to a board member named Douglas Chen, telling him that you've been making questionable financial decisions, that the merger is a mistake, that the company needs steadier leadership. Douglas has been cold to me in meetings lately. I thought it was about the merger terms. It's not about the merger. It's about a coup. Crow is positioning himself to take over after you're disgraced. He discredits you, triggers the logic bomb, destroys the evidence of his theft, and steps in as the voice of stability. The board was going to vote tomorrow, weren't they? Yes, emergency session, to discuss the system failure and vote on leadership response. He was going to use that meeting to push you out. Vivian was silent for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and stood there, looking out at the rain, her reflection ghostly in the glass. 12 years, she said quietly. I built this company from nothing. I worked 100-hour weeks for a decade. I sacrificed everything, my marriage, my health, my... She stopped, drew a breath, and he was going to take it all because he couldn't accept that the board chose me over him. He's not going to take anything. Nolan turned in his chair to face her. We have everything we need, transaction records, communication logs, the shell company registration, the offshore accounts. It's all here. We can prove exactly what he did. It's not enough. What do you mean it's not enough? This is $47 million of documented fraud. This is federal prison. It's documentation. Vivian turned from the window. Her face was hard now, set in the sharp lines that had earned her the Ice Queen reputation. But documentation can be disputed. Crow will claim the records were falsified. He'll say I planted the evidence to frame him. He has allies on the board, Douglas Chen, probably others. If this turns into a he said, she said battle, the company tears itself apart during the merger process, and Meridian walks away. So what do you want to do? I want to finish him. Her voice was cold in a way that made Nolan's skin prickle. I don't just want evidence. I want him to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and look me in the eye and know, absolutely know, that it's over. That every move he's made has been tracked. That every lie he's told has been documented. I want him to see it coming and not be able to do a single thing to stop it. Nolan looked at her. This woman who had shown up on his porch threatening to ruin him, who had carried his daughter through the rain, who had stitched a stuffed rabbit with surgeon-level precision while telling stories about her grandmother. Two versions of the same person, the Ice Queen and the human underneath, both real, both true. The IP traces, he said, the logins from the Four Seasons. If we can prove that Crow was physically present at the hotel during those sessions, credit card receipts, security footage, witness testimony, that corroborates the digital evidence. It makes it much harder to claim the records were falsified. The hotel will have records. They won't release them without a subpoena. Then we get creative. Vivian was already pulling out her phone. I have a contact at the Four Seasons corporate office, someone who owes me a favor from a deal I helped facilitate 3 years ago. It's the middle of the night, but I'm about to make it worth their while to check their email. She walked into the living room to make the call, leaving Nolan alone with the laptop and the evidence of a $47 million betrayal. He kept digging. There was more in the archives than just financial records. Crow had been meticulous, which meant he'd also been arrogant. He hadn't bothered to encrypt his personal notes, probably because he never imagined anyone would get past the logic bomb. Those notes painted a picture of a man consumed by resentment, chronicling every slight he'd endured over 12 years. The time Vivian disagreed with him in a board meeting. The time she got credit for a product launch that he felt he'd contributed to. The time she was featured in Forbes, and he wasn't mentioned. Every grievance, recorded and cataloged, a ledger of wounds that he'd been carrying, nurturing, using as fuel. I found it. Vivian's voice came from the doorway. She looked different, energized, alert, the exhaustion burned away by the hunt. The Four Seasons keeps security footage for 90 days. My contact is pulling the feeds from the business center during the dates that match our IP traces. He's also pulling Crow's member profile. He has a loyalty account, and they track everything. Dining reservations, room bookings, even which drinks he orders at the bar. Can he get us that tonight? He's sending it now. Nolan's email pinged. He opened the attachment, a zip file containing video files and spreadsheets, and a PDF summary of Graham Crow's activity at the Four Seasons over the past 6 months. The video files showed a man in a charcoal suit entering the business center, sitting down at a computer, working for exactly the time periods that matched the suspicious admin logins. The same man, the same suit, the same computer, 17 times. That's him, Vivian said, leaning over Nolan's shoulder. That's Graham. And that's your corroboration. The spreadsheet showed credit card transactions, drinks at the bar, meals at the restaurant, tips for the valet. All time-stamped, all traceable, all proving that Graham Crow was physically present at the Four Seasons on the exact dates and times that someone used his admin credentials to access the system from the hotel's network. He's done, Nolan said. He just doesn't know it yet. Vivian didn't smile. Her expression was something harder and more complicated. The look of someone who had just been handed a weapon and was calculating exactly how to use it. The board meeting is in 9 hours, she said. We need to prepare. We? You found the evidence? You disarmed the bomb? You traced the IP addresses and built the case. She held his gaze. You're coming with me. I quit, remember? Consider yourself unquit. Temporary consulting basis. Full daily rate plus expenses. She paused. And the severance package I promised, regardless of how this plays out. I don't want... This isn't charity. This is me paying for value received. Her voice softened slightly. You could have let me drown this morning. You had every reason to. I threatened you. I stood on your porch and promised to destroy your life. And you helped me anyway. I helped because my daughter was sick, and you didn't hesitate to... I know why you helped. She cut him off with a gentleness that surprised them both. I know exactly why, and that's why I'm asking you to see this through. Not for me. For the 7,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on that merger closing. For the truth. For the simple, unremarkable fact that some things are worth fighting for. Nolan looked at her. The kitchen was quiet around them. Just the hum of the laptop in the rain and the distant sound of Mia breathing in her sleep down the hall. A father who had finally chosen his daughter. A woman who had learned what that choice cost too late. Two people who had every reason to walk away from each other, and no good reason to stay. Except that some things were worth fighting for. 9 hours, he said. We should get some sleep. Sleep is for people who aren't about to take down a $47 million embezzler. Sleep is for people who have sick children who might wake up needing them. Vivian's expression flickered. I'll take the couch. I wasn't offering you the couch. I know, I'm taking it anyway. She held up a hand before he could argue. 3 hours. Then we start preparing for the board meeting. Deal? Nolan wanted to argue. His body wanted him to argue more. The exhaustion was a physical weight now, pressing down on every muscle and joint and thought. Deal, he said. He found her a blanket from the hall closet, watched her settle onto the couch with the same precise efficiency she brought to everything else, and then stood in the doorway of his daughter's room, listening to her breathe. 3 hours until everything changed. 3 hours until they walked into a room full of people who didn't know what was coming and ended the career of a man who had spent a year planning to destroy them both. 3 hours. Nolan closed his eyes, and against all odds, he slept. The alarm never went off because Nolan had forgotten to set it, but his body woke him anyway at 6:15, 3 hours and 12 minutes after he'd closed his eyes. The gray Seattle dawn was seeping through the blinds, turning everything the color of old pewter, and for a moment he lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember why dread was sitting in his chest like a stone. Then it came back. All of it. The fever. The hospital. The logic bomb. Graham Crow. $47 million. The board meeting in less than 3 hours. He sat up and immediately checked on Mia. She was still asleep, her breathing steady, her color better than it had been yesterday. The fever had broken completely sometime during the night. When he pressed his hand to her forehead, her skin was cool and dry. Professor Bunn was tucked under her arm, his newly reinforced ear holding strong. In the living room, Vivian was already awake. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that she'd somehow managed without access to her usual arsenal of styling tools, her wrinkled blouse tucked into trousers that had long since given up on maintaining their crease. She looked like a corporate warrior who'd been through a battle and was preparing for another one. "Coffee's made," she said without looking up. "I figured out your machine. Did you sleep at all?" 2 hours? It's enough. She finally looked at him, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the stress, the weight of what they were about to do. There was something alive in her eyes, something sharp and focused. I've been going through the evidence again, organizing it into a presentation format. When we walk into that boardroom, I want every piece of information at our fingertips. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. Nolan poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the rain that had finally slowed to a drizzle. The sky was the color of concrete, and the puddles in his yard reflected it back like broken mirrors. I need to find someone to stay with Mia, he said. Already handled. He turned. What? My assistant, Patricia. She has 3 children of her own and spent 10 years as a pediatric nurse before she went into administration. She's on her way here now with supplies, children's books, coloring materials, healthy snacks. She'll stay with Mia until we get back. You called your assistant at 6 in the morning on a Sunday? I called her at 5. She was already awake. Vivian's expression softened slightly. I told her about Mia, about what happened yesterday. She volunteered before I finished the sentence. Nolan didn't know what to say. 24 hours ago, he'd been alone, utterly, completely alone, trying to hold together a life that was falling apart at every seam. Now there were people showing up, helping, caring. It felt foreign, almost suspicious. Thank you, he managed. Vivian nodded once and returned to her laptop. The gesture said everything doesn't need to be a moment. Patricia arrived at 7:30. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the calm competence of someone who had handled every possible childhood emergency and could handle whatever Mia might throw at her. She introduced herself to Nolan with a firm handshake and a warm smile, then went directly to Mia's room to check on her. She's sleeping, Patricia reported when she came back out. Fever's gone, breathing's clear. I'll have breakfast ready when she wakes up, and I brought the Harry Potter audiobooks in case she wants to rest. She loves Harry Potter, Nolan said. Ms. Slate mentioned that. He looked at Vivian, who was very deliberately not meeting his eyes. How had she known that? When had Mia mentioned it? In the hospital, maybe. During one of the quiet moments when he'd been on his phone, tracking down evidence, not paying attention to the conversation happening beside him. She'd been paying attention, even then. We need to go, Vivian said, closing her laptop and standing. The car's outside. The drive downtown took 35 minutes in Sunday morning traffic. The black town car slid through the wet streets with the same silent efficiency it had shown yesterday, and the same driver sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, his expression revealing nothing about the chaos he'd witnessed in the past 24 hours. Nolan sat in the back seat with a manila folder on his lap, the physical copies of the evidence they'd compiled. Transaction records, IP traces, security footage stills, the registration documents for Lighthouse Holdings, everything they needed to end Graham Crow's career and send him to federal prison. Vivian sat beside him, reviewing her notes on a tablet, her lips moving slightly as she rehearsed the presentation in her mind. She'd changed into fresh clothes that her driver had retrieved from her apartment earlier that morning. A charcoal suit with a silk blouse the color of ice, her armor restored, her Ice Queen persona firmly back in place. But Nolan knew what was underneath now. He'd seen it, and he couldn't unsee it. There's something you should know, Vivian said as they crossed the bridge toward the downtown financial district. I got a call an hour ago from Douglas Chen. He wanted to give me a heads up that there would be difficult questions at today's meeting. He's warning you? He's gloating. He thinks Crow's plan worked. He thinks I'm about to be publicly humiliated and forced out. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. He doesn't know what we have. Do you think he's in on it? The embezzlement? I don't think so. Douglas is a follower, not a leader. Crow fed him just enough information to turn him into a useful idiot. He genuinely believes he's protecting the company from my reckless leadership. She paused. When the truth comes out, Douglas will be the first one to claim he had no idea. That's convenient. That's politics. The car pulled up to a glass tower that rose 47 stories into the gray Seattle sky. Slate Dynamics headquarters. Nolan had worked here for 4 years, but he'd never entered through the executive entrance before. A private garage beneath the building, accessed through a gate that required a key card and a security check. They rode a private elevator to the 37th floor. The doors opened onto a corridor lined with artwork that probably cost more than Nolan's house, leading to a set of double doors made of frosted glass. Beyond those doors was the boardroom where, in approximately 90 minutes, everything would change. "I need to make some calls before the meeting," Vivian said. "There's a conference room down the hall you can use to set up. I'll have IT send someone to help with the AV equipment." "I don't need IT." "No, you wouldn't." The corner of her mouth twitched. "But let them help anyway. They'll feel useful." She disappeared into her office, and Nolan walked down the hall to the conference room she'd mentioned. It was smaller than the main boardroom, but equipped with the same high-end technology. A massive screen on one wall, a sleek conference phone in the center of the table, and more connectivity options than any reasonable meeting could require. He set up the presentation, testing each slide, making sure the video files played smoothly, checking that the financial documents were properly formatted. The work was calming in its way. Technical, precise, something he could control in a situation where so much was beyond his control. At 8:45, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Pierce, I know what you're planning. Walk away now and there won't be consequences. Continue, and I will make sure you never work in this industry again." G.C. Nolan stared at the message for a long moment. Then he screenshotted it and forwarded it to Vivian. Her response came 30 seconds later. "Good." He's scared. The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Vivian met with her legal team, 3 attorneys in expensive suits who had been briefed on the situation overnight and were preparing documentation for the federal authorities. The IT team confirmed that all systems were back online, the logic bomb fully disarmed, the encrypted directories accessible to authorized personnel. At 9:25, people began filing into the boardroom. Nolan watched them through the glass walls of the conference room. The board members arriving one by one, settling into their seats, exchanging the kind of pleasantries that people exchange when they think they know what's about to happen. He recognized some faces from company events and all-hands meetings. Rebecca Hale, the CTO, back early from Portugal, with jet lag visible in her eyes. David Park, head of security, looking uncomfortable in his seat. Douglas Chen, leaning back with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he was about to witness a coup. And then, at 9:28, Graham Crowe walked in. He was wearing his charcoal suit, the same one from the security footage, Nolan noted, and his Patek Philippe watch gleamed on his wrist. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his posture confident, his expression benevolent in the way of someone who was about to deliver very bad news while pretending it wasn't his fault. He took his seat at the far end of the table, directly across from where Vivian would sit, and folded his hands in front of him with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. He doesn't know, Nolan thought. He has no idea. At 9:30 exactly, Vivian walked into the boardroom. Nolan followed 2 steps behind her, the manila folder in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest, but his face carefully neutral. Every eye in the room turned toward them, and more than a few of those eyes widened when they saw Nolan. "Ms. Slate," Douglas Chen said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I wasn't aware we'd be having additional attendees at this meeting. Mr. Pierce submitted his resignation yesterday morning, as I understand it." "Mr. Pierce is here as a consultant," Vivian said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "His expertise was critical in resolving the system failure, and his insights are relevant to the matters we'll be discussing today." I really must object." "Noted." Vivian's voice was ice. "Objection overruled. This is an emergency session and I have broad discretion over attendance." Douglas's face reddened, but he said nothing more. Graham Crowe was watching with an expression of mild curiosity, like a cat observing a mouse that had wandered into its territory. His eyes met Nolan's for just a moment, and what Nolan saw there was not concern or fear, but the cold calculation of someone assessing a threat and finding it manageable. He still thinks he's going to win, Nolan realized. He still thinks his plan is intact. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Vivian began, standing at the head of the table with her tablet in hand. "As you know, we experienced a significant system failure yesterday that threatened our merger timeline. I'm pleased to report that the issue has been fully resolved, and all systems are operational." There was a murmur of relief around the table. Douglas Chen's satisfied expression flickered with something like disappointment. "However," Vivian continued. The investigation into the cause of that failure revealed something far more serious than a technical malfunction. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the large screen on the wall came to life with the first slide of their presentation. What we discovered was evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and corporate sabotage. The room went silent. Over the past 18 months, Vivian said, her voice steady and cold, someone within this organization has been siphoning funds through a shell company called Lighthouse Holdings. The total amount transferred to offshore accounts exceeds $47 million. The murmur that rose this time was not relief. It was shock. Board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Graham Crow's face remained perfectly still. The funds were disguised as vendor payments and consulting fees for companies that do not exist, Vivian continued. The transfers were authorized using admin-level credentials, and the evidence was protected by a logic bomb planted in our system infrastructure, a fail-safe designed to destroy all documentation if anyone attempted to access it. She pressed another button. The screen filled with transaction records, dates, amounts, account numbers. As you can see, the transfers followed a regular pattern. Every 2 weeks, always on Thursday, always between 2 and 4 a.m. Another button. IP addresses and geolocation data. The admin credentials used to authorize these transfers were accessed from external locations, specifically from the business center of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Seattle. Another button. Security footage stills showing a man in a charcoal suit sitting at a computer. Security footage from those dates confirms that the person using those credentials was physically present at the hotel during each login session. The image on the screen was unmistakable. Graham Crow, captured in high definition, his face clearly visible, his Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. Every eye in the room turned to him. For the first time, something changed in Crow's expression. The benevolent mask cracked, just slightly, and underneath it was something colder and more dangerous. "This is absurd," he said, his voice tight but controlled. "These images could easily be falsified. This entire presentation is nothing but a desperate attempt to deflect from the real issue. Vivian's catastrophic mismanagement of this company's infrastructure. The images are time-stamped and authenticated by Four Seasons Corporate Security," Vivian replied. "We also have your member profile from the hotel's loyalty program, which documents your presence at the hotel on each of these dates, including dining reservations and credit card transactions. Coincidence? I travel frequently. I often work from hotels. At 2 in the morning? On the same days that admin credentials registered to your account were used to transfer millions of dollars to offshore accounts. My credentials could have been stolen. This could be identity theft. Someone is clearly trying to frame me." Vivian smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "That's an interesting theory, Graham. Let's explore it." She pressed another button. The screen filled with the registration documents for Lighthouse Holdings. The shell company that received these transfers was registered in Delaware 3 years ago. The registered agent is a law firm called Harmon & Associates. Harmon & Associates has exactly one other client in their public filings. She paused. I have no knowledge of the property purchased 6 months ago in Costa Rica, a beach house in a gated community, was bought through a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. That holding company is a subsidiary of Lighthouse Holdings. Another slide. Real estate records, property photographs, a beautiful house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I've never seen that property in my life. Then why is the deed registered to a trust in your sister's name? For the first time, Graham Crow had nothing to say. Martha Crow of Portland, Oregon, Vivian continued. The sister you've been estranged from for 20 years. I imagine you thought using her name would create distance between yourself and the asset. A reasonable precaution. But the trust documents were filed with your personal attorney using letterhead from your personal law firm and signed by a notary who happens to be married to your housekeeper. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Douglas Chen's face had gone from satisfied to ashen. Rebecca Hale was staring at Crow with the expression of someone who had just discovered a snake in their garden. The other board members were frozen, their eyes moving between the screen and Crow's face, watching a legend disintegrate in real time. "You don't have proof," Crow said, but his voice had changed. The confidence was gone. What remained was the desperate, cornered sound of a man watching his escape routes close one by one. Actually, we do. Vivian nodded at Nolan, who stepped forward and placed the manila folder on the table. Mr. Crow, Nolan said, speaking for the first time since entering the room, when you changed the encryption key on the authentication bridge, you used a password that you clearly believed no one would ever guess. Point no point. The lighthouse where your father took you as a child. It's in a photograph you keep in your desk drawer. Something flickered in Crow's eyes. Fear. Real fear. You built the logic bomb to destroy the evidence, but you also kept personal notes, a chronicle of grievances against Ms. Slate, documenting every perceived slight over the past 12 years. Those notes are remarkably detailed. They read like a manifesto. Nolan opened the folder and began laying documents on the table. They're also entirely unencrypted because you never imagined anyone would get past your failsafe. This is character assassination, Crow snarled. This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a woman who has run this company into the ground and is looking for someone else to blame. The FBI would disagree. Vivian's voice cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward her. I made a call this morning, she said, to the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. They've been briefed on everything we've discovered. Agents are waiting in the lobby. When this meeting concludes, they will be escorting you out of the building. Crow's face went white, then red, then something beyond color, a shade of fury and disbelief that seemed to transcend the visible spectrum. You can't do this, he said, and his voice had risen now, losing its careful control. I built this company. I was here when we were 3 people in a garage. I wrote the original code. I brought in the first investors. This company wouldn't exist without me. And it almost didn't exist because of you. Vivian's voice was steady. $47 million, Graham. You stole $47 million from a company you helped build, and then you planted a bomb that would have destroyed everything if it had triggered. You were willing to let 7,000 people lose their jobs, to let the merger collapse, to let our reputation be destroyed, just so you could disappear to a beach in Costa Rica. I deserved it. The words came out raw, unfiltered, and Nolan saw something pass across Vivian's face. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. I deserve that money. I deserve this company. I gave everything to build it, and what did I get? A board seat. A consulting fee. The privilege of watching you take credit for everything I created. You were compensated according to your contract. My contract? Crow laughed, and the sound was bitter and broken. My contract paid me a fraction of what this company is worth, a fraction of what I built. I watched you become a billionaire on paper while I sat in meetings and smiled and pretended that I wasn't being robbed. So you decided to do the robbing yourself. I decided to take what was mine. Crow stood up, his chair scraping back, his hands gripping the edge of the table. And I would have succeeded if you hadn't, he pointed at Nolan, his fingers shaking. If this burned-out engineer hadn't decided to play hero. Sit down, Graham. Don't tell me to sit down. I'm a founding member of this board. I have rights. What you have, Vivian said, is the right to remain silent, which I strongly suggest you exercise because everything you say in this room is being recorded, and the FBI agents in the lobby will be very interested in your confession. Crow looked around the room, at the board members who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the screen still displaying evidence of his crimes, at the folder full of documents that would send him to prison. He looked at Nolan, and the hatred in his eyes was so pure and concentrated that it seemed almost physical. And then, abruptly, something changed. The fury drained from his face. The tension left his body. He straightened his suit jacket, adjusted his tie, and sat back down in his chair with the calm of a man who had just made a decision. Well played, Vivian, he said. Well played. This isn't a game, Graham. Everything is a game. He smiled, a terrible smile, the smile of someone who has nothing left to lose. And I may have lost this round, but I've set other pieces in motion, pieces that can't be called back. Vivian's expression didn't change, but Nolan saw something tighten behind her eyes. What pieces? She asked. Crow's smile widened. Check your phone. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vivian pulled out her phone, unlocked the screen, and went very still. "What is it?" Douglas Chen asked, leaning forward. Vivian didn't answer. She was staring at her phone, her face draining of color, her jaw tight. Nolan moved toward her. "Vivian?" She turned the phone so he could see the screen. It was a news article from a local tabloid site, published 17 minutes ago. The headline read, "Slate Dynamics CEO in secret affair with disgraced engineer. Explosive photos reveal late-night rendezvous." Below the headline were photographs. Vivian's car parked outside Nolan's house. Vivian visible through the kitchen window, leaning over his shoulder at the computer. Vivian emerging from his front door at 4 in the morning. The photos were grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but they were unmistakably real, and they were arranged in a way that suggested something sordid, something romantic, something that had absolutely not happened. "I arranged for a photographer last night," Crow said, his voice silky with satisfaction. "Just in case things didn't go according to plan. The story is already trending. By noon, every major outlet will have picked it up. By tomorrow, it will be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal." "This is a lie," Nolan said. "Nothing happened between us. We were working on the evidence that's going to send you to prison." "Does it matter?" Crow spread his hands. "The photos don't show you working. They show a late-night visit. They show intimacy. They show exactly what they were designed to show." He turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the woman who claims to be a victim of my alleged fraud. But the truth is, she's been conducting an affair with an employee. An employee she then brought into this boardroom to present fabricated evidence against me. Ask yourselves, who is really the criminal here?" "Graham," Douglas Chen began. "Save it, Douglas. You've been played, just like everyone else." Crow stood up again, buttoning his jacket. "I'll be leaving now. When the FBI agents try to arrest me, I'll go quietly. But when my lawyers get through with this company, there won't be anything left to merge." He looked at Vivian. "Enjoy your scandal." He walked toward the door. "Graham." Vivian's voice stopped him. "You forgot something." He turned. "The photographs were taken from outside my house," she said, "on a public street, by a photographer you hired, a photographer who can be identified, questioned, and subpoenaed." Her voice was ice. "A photographer who will testify that you paid him to take compromising photos of your CEO, photos designed to destroy her reputation and undermine the criminal case against you." "That's witness tampering," Nolan added. "Obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit defamation." Crow's smile faltered. "And the metadata on those photos," Nolan continued, "will show exactly when they were taken and what device was used. If that device can be traced to someone you paid, that's another charge. If the photographer was instructed to misrepresent what he saw, that's fraud. If any of this was coordinated through your attorney, that's—" "Enough!" Crow's voice was sharp. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Vivian took a step toward him. "Graham, I have spent 12 years building a company in an industry that wanted me to fail. I have survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and 1,000 small-minded men who thought they could push me out of the way. Do you really think a tabloid story is going to stop me? It will destroy your credibility. It will destroy nothing, because in about 20 minutes, I'm going to hold a press conference where I will present every piece of evidence we've compiled against you. The financial records, the security footage, the offshore accounts, the confession you just made in front of the entire board." She smiled. "And then I'm going to explain that the photographs were part of a last-ditch smear campaign by a desperate criminal trying to escape justice. Nobody will believe, everybody will believe it, because it's true." Vivian's voice dropped, becoming something low and dangerous. "You had one chance, Graham. One moment where you could have walked out of here with some shred of dignity. Instead, you chose to throw a bomb and hope it would burn everything down around you. Well, congratulations. It's burning. But you're the one standing in the fire." The door to the boardroom opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. They had the neutral expressions and confident postures of people who did this for a living, the kind of people who could wrestle a suspect to the ground without breaking a sweat, but preferred not to if it could be avoided. "Mr. Graham Crow?" the first one said. Crow looked at the agents, looked at the board. looked at Vivian, standing at the head of the table with the calm certainty of a queen who had just won a very long war. "I want my lawyer," he said. "You'll have access to counsel at the federal building." The agent stepped forward. "Please come with us." Graham Crow, founding board member, respected elder statesman, architect of a $47 million fraud, allowed himself to be led out of the boardroom. He didn't look back. He didn't resist. He walked out with the same measured steps he'd used to walk in, as if he were simply leaving an ordinary meeting on an ordinary day. The door closed behind him. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The board members sat frozen in their seats, processing what they had just witnessed. The screen on the wall still displayed the evidence slides. The folder on the table still held the documents that had ended a career. Then Douglas Chen cleared his throat. "I want it on the record," he said, "that I had no knowledge of any of this. I was misled by Mr. Crow. I believed his concerns about Mrs. Slate's leadership were genuine." "They are on the record, Douglas." Vivian's voice was tired now, the adrenaline of confrontation giving way to exhaustion. "Everything is on the record." "I'll be voting in full support of the merger," Douglas continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "And in full support of your continued leadership." "How magnanimous." Rebecca Hale stood up. "I move that we take a 30-minute recess. Everyone needs time to process this." "Seconded," someone said. "All in favor?" Every hand went up. The board members filed out in stunned silence, leaving Nolan and Vivian alone in the boardroom. The screen had gone to screensaver mode, a gentle rotation of the Slate Dynamics logo, circling like a planet in orbit. Vivian walked to the window and looked out at the Seattle skyline. The rain had stopped. Through a break in the clouds, a single beam of sunlight was falling on the distant waters of the Sound, turning a patch of gray to silver. "It's not over," she said. "I know." "The tabloid story, the press, the questions." She pressed her palm against the glass. "Even after I explain everything, there will be people who believe the worst. There will be whispers, rumors, the kind of stain that never quite washes out." Nolan stood beside her, looking at the same view, seeing the same beam of light. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "You're going to anyway. Last night, when you fixed Professor Bunn's ear, Mia looked at you like you'd just performed a miracle, like you were the most amazing person she'd ever met." He paused. "She doesn't look at many people that way. She's careful. She's been let down too many times." Vivian said nothing. "She asked me this morning if you were coming back. Before I left, Patricia was making her breakfast, and Mia asked if the lady who fixed Professor Bunn was going to visit again." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know." Vivian turned from the window. Her eyes were bright. Not with tears exactly, but with something close. Something she was fighting to control. "The press conference is in 20 minutes, she said. "After that, I have meetings with the Meridian team, the legal department, and the FBI. I probably won't be free until tonight." "I understand. But—" She stopped, drew a breath. "If you wouldn't mind, if it wouldn't be inappropriate, I'd like to—" "Come by for dinner," Nolan said. She looked at him. "Nothing fancy, probably takeout, honestly. My cooking is terrible and Mia is still recovering. But she'd like to see you, and I—" He shook his head. "I think I would too." For a moment, Vivian Slate, CEO of a $4 billion company, survivor of a corporate coup, woman who had just sent a founding board member to federal prison, looked almost uncertain, almost vulnerable, almost like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be invited somewhere simply because people wanted her there. "Okay," she said. "Dinner. Around 7? I'll try." "Don't try. Just come." She almost smiled. It was closer than he'd ever seen, close enough that he could imagine what her face might look like if she ever let it fully arrive. "I need to prepare for the press conference," she said. "I know. You should go home. Be with your daughter." "I know that too." "And Nolan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." The words came out quiet, heavy, like they'd been sitting inside her for a long time, waiting for permission to leave. "For everything. For not letting me drown." He looked at her. This complicated, guarded, deeply human woman who had walked into his life like a storm and somehow ended up helping him save the only thing that mattered. You would have done the same, he said. Maybe. She turned back to the window. I'd like to think so. Nolan left her standing there, silhouetted against the glass, preparing for the battle that was still to come. He walked out of the boardroom, past the empty chairs where board members had sat in shock, past the screen still showing its circling logo, past the frosted glass doors that separated this world from the ordinary one. He took the elevator down alone. The silence was profound. The particular silence that follows an explosion, when the debris is still settling and the air is still thick with dust. In the lobby, reporters were already gathering, held back by security guards, their cameras ready. Someone shouted a question when they saw him emerge from the executive elevator, but he didn't acknowledge it. He walked through a side door, out into the parking garage, and climbed into the town car that was waiting for him. Home, he told the driver. The car pulled out of the garage and into the Seattle morning. The clouds were breaking up now, the gray giving way to patches of blue. The streets were quiet. Sunday morning, most people still in bed, unaware that a few blocks away a man was being escorted to federal custody and a woman was about to stand in front of cameras and tell the truth. Nolan leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. It wasn't over. Vivian was right about that. There would be questions, investigations, the long, grinding process of legal consequences and corporate recovery. There would be difficult conversations and uncomfortable headlines, and the kind of scrutiny that came with being at the center of a scandal, even one where you were on the right side. But right now, in this moment, with the morning light filtering through the car windows and the weight of the last 24 hours finally beginning to lift, Nolan allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not certainty, not triumph. Just the quiet, stubborn hope that maybe things were going to be okay. The car turned onto his street, and he saw his house in the distance. The sagging porch, the broken gutters, the dented mailbox. It looked different in the morning light, less like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, more like a place where things could start to go right. Patricia opened the door before he reached the porch. "She's awake," Patricia said. "She's been asking about you." Nolan walked inside, and there was Mia sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of cereal in front of her and Professor Bunn on the chair beside her. Her color was good. Her eyes were clear. She looked like a healthy 6-year-old who had beaten a fever and was ready to get back to the business of being a kid. "Daddy!" She scrambled out of her chair and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "You're back!" "I'm back." He knelt down and held her, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo and the particular warmth of a child who was finally on the mend. "How are you feeling, baby girl?" "Better. Patricia made me oatmeal with blueberries." She pulled back and looked at him with the clear, direct gaze that children use when they're about to ask something important. "Is Vivienne coming back?" "Yeah, baby. She's coming for dinner." Mia's face lit up. "Really? Really? Can we make her something? Not takeout. Something real?" Nolan thought about his cooking skills, thought about the state of his kitchen, thought about the fact that he was running on 3 hours of sleep and had just helped dismantle a $47 million fraud scheme. "We can try," he said. "What do you want to make?" Mia thought about it, hard, with the gravity that 6-year-olds bring to important decisions. "Spaghetti," she said finally, "with the red sauce and garlic bread, and we can set the table nice with the candles from the drawer." "The candles we use for power outages? They're still candles." He laughed. It felt good, like a muscle he'd forgotten he had, remembering how to work. "Okay," he said. "Spaghetti, red sauce, garlic bread, candles." He stood up and looked around his disaster of a kitchen, at the woman who had volunteered to babysit on a Sunday morning, at his daughter who was healthy and happy and planning a dinner party. "But first, I need more coffee." "I'll make a fresh pot," Patricia said. "And I stocked your refrigerator this morning. Thought you might need it." "You didn't have to. Miss Slate asked me to." Patricia's smile was knowing. "She said you probably hadn't been to the grocery store in weeks." She wasn't wrong. Nolan looked at the kitchen table, where Mia was already making plans, arranging the salt and pepper shakers, talking to Professor Bunn about where everyone would sit, creating the world she wanted out of the materials she had. This was what it looked like, he realized. Not triumph, not victory. Just the small, quiet acts of rebuilding that followed every storm. Making coffee, planning dinner, holding your daughter, hoping that the person you invited would actually show up. Outside, the clouds continued to break apart. The rain was over, for now. And somewhere across the city, Vivian Slate was stepping up to a podium, preparing to tell the truth, beginning the long process of putting the pieces back together. Nolan poured himself a cup of coffee and started making a shopping list. There was spaghetti to cook. The spaghetti was not going well. Nolan stood at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce that had somehow gone from promisingly bubbling to suspiciously thick in the span of 3 minutes. The pasta water was boiling over, sending hissing streams down the side of the pot. The garlic bread was in the oven, but he couldn't remember if he'd set the timer or just stared at the buttons and hoped for the best. "Daddy, the water's doing the thing again." Mia was perched on a kitchen chair she'd dragged to the counter, watching the chaos unfold with the serene detachment of someone who had no intention of helping but very strong opinions about how things should be done. "I see it, baby." Nolan grabbed the pot lid and lifted it, releasing a cloud of steam that fogged his glasses. "Can you hand me the wooden spoon?" "Which one?" "The one that's not covered in sauce." "They're both covered in sauce." She was right. They were both covered in sauce. The kitchen looked like a crime scene. Red splatter on the backsplash. Flour dusted across the counter from an abandoned attempt at homemade garlic bread that had devolved into store-bought when Nolan remembered he didn't actually know how to make bread. Pots and pans covering every available surface. Professor Bunn had been relocated to the living room after a near miss with a flying tomato. Patricia had left an hour ago after helping Nolan make a grocery list and gently suggesting that perhaps he should stick to recipes he'd made before. He had ignored this advice. He had decided to make his mother's spaghetti sauce from memory, despite the fact that he hadn't made it in years and couldn't remember whether the oregano went in before or after the tomatoes. It went after. He was almost sure it went after. "What time is Vivian coming?" Mia asked. 7, maybe a little later. She has a lot of meetings." "What kind of meetings?" "The boring kind, with lawyers and reporters." "Why does she have to meet with lawyers?" "Because sometimes when you catch bad people doing bad things, you have to explain it to a lot of other people who write it down." Mia considered this. Is the bad man going to jail? Nolan paused his stirring. He'd been careful about what he told Mia. She was 6, and the details of corporate fraud and federal investigations weren't exactly bedtime story material, but she was perceptive in ways that constantly surprised him. She knew something big had happened. She knew it involved Vivian and the late-night work session, and the reason Daddy had left so early this morning. "Probably," he said. "Yeah, the bad man is probably going to jail." "Good," Mia nodded with the firm moral clarity of childhood. "Bad people should go to jail. That's what happens in stories. That's what's supposed to happen in real life, too. Does it always happen?" He thought about that. About the cases that fell through, the criminals who walked, the justice that sometimes came too late, or not at all. About the fact that even now, with all the evidence they'd compiled, Graham Crow's lawyers would fight every charge. The process would take years. The outcome was never guaranteed. "Not always," he said. "But we try." The doorbell rang. Mia was off her chair and sprinting toward the front door before Nolan could even turn off the stove. He heard her throw open the door with the enthusiasm of a child who had been waiting all day for this exact moment. "You came!" "I told you I would," Vivian's voice carried into the kitchen, and something in Nolan's chest unclenched at the sound of it. She'd actually come. Despite the press conference, the meetings, the chaos of the day, she'd actually shown up. He wiped his hands on a dish towel that was already beyond saving and walked to the front door. Vivian stood on the porch, looking nothing like the woman who had appeared on his doorstep 24 hours ago. The corporate armor was gone. No designer coat, no silk blouse, no heels sinking into the wood. She was wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face bare of the makeup that usually sharpened her features into something untouchable. She looked tired. She looked human. She looked like someone who had fought a very long battle and was still standing, but only just. In her hands, she was holding a stuffed animal. "I saw this at the gift shop near my apartment," she said, holding it out to Mia. It reminded me of Professor Bunn. It was a rabbit. Not the same as Professor Bunn. This one was gray instead of brown, with floppy ears and a small bow tie, but it had the same soft, well-made quality, the kind of stuffed animal that would hold up to years of love. Mia took it carefully, examining it with the critical eye she brought to all important acquisitions. "He's very handsome." "I thought so too." "What's his name?" "I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." Mia studied the rabbit, turned it over, checked its ears, its paws, its little bow tie. Then she looked up at Vivian with complete seriousness. "His name is Professor Bunn, Jr.," she announced. "He's Professor Bunn's son. He came to visit." "That makes perfect sense." "Come in." Mia grabbed Vivian's hand and pulled her inside. "Daddy's making spaghetti, but it's going wrong." "It's not going wrong," Nolan said. "It's going creatively." Vivian looked past him into the kitchen. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been amusement. "You have sauce on your glasses," she said. "I'm aware." "And in your hair." "Also aware." "Would you like help?" "That depends. Can you cook?" "I can follow directions." She was already moving toward the kitchen, rolling up the sleeves of her sweater. "Show me what needs to be done." What needed to be done, as it turned out, was everything. Vivian took over the sauce with the same methodical precision she'd applied to the logic bomb, tasting, adjusting, adding a splash of wine that Nolan didn't even know he had. She rescued the garlic bread from the oven seconds before it crossed the line from golden to burnt. She drained the pasta, tossed it with olive oil, and somehow made the entire chaotic kitchen look like it was exactly where it was supposed to be in the cooking process. Nolan watched her work and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not attraction, exactly. Though there was that too, simmering beneath the surface of everything that had happened between them. It was more like recognition, like watching someone solve a puzzle he'd been staring at for too long to see clearly. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm good at most things." She glanced at him. "It's exhausting. Being good at things? Being expected to be." She turned back to the sauce, stirring it slowly. "When I was young, I decided that if I was perfect at everything, no one could ever hurt me. If I never made mistakes, never showed weakness, never needed help, then I would be untouchable." A pause. "It took me a long time to realize that untouchable also means unreachable." "What changed?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I met someone who needed help once, a long time ago, and I didn't help them. I was too busy being perfect to notice that they were drowning." She set the spoon down. "When they were gone, I realized that all my perfection hadn't protected me from anything. It had just made me alone." Nolan didn't ask who she was talking about. The weight of the words made it clear this wasn't a conversation for the kitchen, with Mia setting the table in the next room and dinner almost ready. "The sauce is done," Vivian said, her voice shifting back to something lighter. "Where are your serving bowls?" "I don't think I have serving bowls." "Of course you don't." She pulled a pot out of the cabinet. "This will do." Dinner was served at the kitchen table, which Mia had decorated with the emergency candles and a centerpiece made of crayons arranged in a glass jar. Professor Bunn sat in one chair. Professor Bunn Jr. sat in another. Nolan and Vivian and Mia filled the remaining 3 seats, passing garlic bread and twirling spaghetti and talking about everything and nothing. Mia told Vivian about her school, her teacher Mrs. Patterson, who said she was intense, her best friend Sophia, who had a guinea pig named Mr. Whiskers. Vivian listened with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from earlier parts of the conversation. She told Mia about her own childhood, the seamstress grandmother, the space princess costume, the telescope she'd used to learn the constellations. "I wanted to be an astronaut," Vivian said. "When I was your age, I thought if I could get far enough away from Earth, I could see everything clearly." "Did you become an astronaut?" "No, I became a CEO instead." "What's a CEO?" "Someone who tells other people what to do." Mia considered this. "That sounds boring. It often is. Being an astronaut would be better." "You might be right." After dinner, Mia insisted on showing Vivian her room. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, the crayon drawings on the walls, the collection of rocks she'd gathered from the park. Vivian examined each rock with the seriousness it deserved, listening as Mia explained which ones were special and why. Nolan stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt something shift in his understanding of the world. This was what family looked like, he realized. Not the perfect picture in the magazines, not the neat categories of mother, father, child. Just people in a room, paying attention to each other, making space for each other's rock collections and telescope dreams. "It's past your bedtime, baby girl," he said eventually. 5 more minutes? 2 more minutes? 3? 2.5. Mia used her 2.5 minutes to explain the plot of Harry Potter to Vivian, who had apparently never read the books. Vivian took notes on her phone, promising to start the first book that week. "You have to read all of them," Mia instructed. "They get better." "I will read all of them." "Promise?" "Promise." Mia considered this, then held out her pinky finger. "Pinky promise." Vivian looked at the small finger. Something passed across her face, an emotion Nolan couldn't quite catch, and then she linked her own pinky with Mia's. "Pinky promise," she said. Mia smiled. It was the biggest smile Nolan had seen from her in months. He tucked her in while Vivian waited in the living room. The routine was familiar. Blankets pulled up, Professor Bunn, original, on one side, Professor Bunn Jr. on the other, a kiss on the forehead. "Daddy?" Mia said as he reached for the light switch. "Yeah, baby? I like her." "I know you do." "Do you like her?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Nolan looked at his daughter, her clear eyes, her direct gaze, her complete absence of guile, and decided that she deserved honesty. "Yeah," he said. "I like her." "Good." Mia closed her eyes. "She should come back tomorrow." "We'll see." "She should come back every day." "We'll see, baby." "She's not scary when you know her." "No, she's not." He turned off the light and left the door open a crack, the way she liked it, and walked back to the living room where Vivian was standing at the window, looking out at the street where, yesterday, a photographer had been lurking in the rain. "Is she asleep?" Vivian asked. "Getting there." "She's remarkable." Vivian's voice was soft. "You've done something right, Nolan. Whatever you think you failed at, you've raised a remarkable child. She's easy to love. Easy to love and hard to keep up with. The best ones usually are." They stood in silence for a moment. The candles from dinner were still burning on the kitchen table, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The house smelled like spaghetti sauce and garlic bread, and the particular warmth of a home that had been, for one evening at least, something more than a shelter. "The press conference went well," Vivian said, "in case you were wondering." "I was." The reporters asked about the photographs, of course, the tabloid story. I explained that we'd been working to recover evidence of fraud, that the photos were deliberately misleading, that Mr. Crow had hired a photographer as part of his attempt to discredit me. She paused. "Some of them believed me. Some of them didn't. But the FBI's involvement adds credibility. When federal agents are escorting someone out of a building, it's hard to argue that the whole thing is a fabrication." "What about the merger?" "Still on track. Meridian's team was briefed this afternoon. They're satisfied that the fraud was contained, that the systems are secure, and that the company's leadership is stable." A ghost of a smile. "They were also impressed by how quickly we identified and resolved the threat. Apparently our crisis response was exemplary." That's one word for it. Another word would be improvised, or desperate, or held together by coffee and sheer stubbornness. She turned from the window. But it worked. It worked. Graham Crow is in federal custody. He'll be arraigned tomorrow. His lawyers are already making noise about bail, but given the offshore accounts and the Costa Rica property, he's considered a flight risk. He'll probably be held until trial. And the money? The $47 million? Being traced. The FBI has specialists who do this, follow the money, freeze the accounts, recover what can be recovered. She shrugged. "We won't get all of it back. These things never work out perfectly. But we'll get enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to move forward, to close the merger, to pay the people we owe and reassure the investors and keep the company alive. She met his eyes. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Get enough to move forward. Nolan thought about the past 2 days. The fever and the hospital and the logic bomb and the boardroom confrontation. The way everything had seemed impossible until suddenly it wasn't. The way two people who had every reason to be enemies had ended up on the same side, fighting the same fight, cooking spaghetti in a kitchen that probably violated multiple health codes. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. I might not answer." "At the hospital, when you were talking about someone you lost, someone you didn't help when they were drowning." He hesitated. "Who were they?" Vivian was quiet for a long time. The candles flickered. The rain had started again outside, a gentle patter against the windows, softer than the storm that had been raging when she first arrived. "His name was Daniel," she said finally. "He was my husband." Nolan waited. "We met in business school. He was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that made everyone else feel slow. We got married young, built careers together, thought we had everything figured out." She pressed her palm against the window, watching the rain run down the glass. "But Daniel had depression. He hid it well. Most people do. And I was so focused on my own trajectory, my own goals, my own version of success, that I didn't see how bad it was getting. Vivian, he told me once that he felt invisible, that no matter how much he achieved, he felt like he was disappearing." Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of something raw beneath the control. "I told him to see a therapist. I told him to exercise more, eat better, try meditation. I gave him advice instead of presence, solutions instead of understanding." "What happened?" "He took a business trip to San Francisco. I was supposed to go with him, but I had a board meeting I thought was more important. On the second night, he walked to the Golden Gate Bridge." She paused. "He called me from the walkway. I was in the middle of my meeting. I saw his name on my phone, and I sent it to voicemail." The silence that followed was the kind that couldn't be filled with words. "By the time I listened to the message," Vivian said, "it was too late." Nolan didn't offer platitudes, didn't say it wasn't her fault, or that she couldn't have known, or any of the things people say when they want to make grief more manageable. He just stood there, in the candlelit living room, and let the weight of her story exist without trying to change its shape. "That's why you caught Mia," he said quietly, "at the house, when she fell. That's why I catch everyone." Vivian turned from the window. Her eyes were bright, but no tears fell. "I can't bring Daniel back. I can't undo the meeting I chose or the call I didn't answer. But I can be present now. I can notice when someone is falling. I can reach out instead of turning away." She took a breath. "It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't make me forgive myself. But it's something. It's more than something. It's not enough." Maybe it doesn't have to be enough. Maybe it just has to be what you can do." She looked at him, really looked, the way she had in the hospital, the way she had in the boardroom, the way she had when she'd promised Mia she would read all the Harry Potter books. There was something vulnerable in her expression, something undefended. The Ice Queen was gone. What remained was a woman who had loved someone, lost them, and was still finding her way back to the world. "You're kind," she said. "I didn't expect that. When I showed up here yesterday, threatening lawsuits and demanding access, I expected you to be defensive, hostile, maybe even vengeful." She almost smiled. "You were just kind." I was exhausted. Exhaustion doesn't make people kind. It usually does the opposite. My mother used to say that you can tell who someone really is by how they act when they're tired. Nolan shrugged. "I guess I'm just someone who doesn't have the energy to be mean." That's not a weakness." "I know." They stood there in the space between the candlelight and the rain, and something shifted. It was subtle, not a dramatic revelation, not a movie-perfect moment, but something changed in the way they were standing, the way they were looking at each other, the way the air moved between them. "I should go," Vivian said. "Should you?" "It's late. You need sleep. Your daughter might wake up. She sleeps through the night, especially when she's recovering from being sick. I have meetings tomorrow, early. You have meetings every day. Nolan, stay." The word hung in the air, simple, direct, the kind of word that changed everything or nothing, depending on what came next. "I don't mean," he started. "I know what you mean. The couch is available, or I could take the couch and you could have my room, or, Nolan." "Yeah?" "Stop talking." She closed the distance between them, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with the same decisive clarity she brought to everything else. And then she was standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "I haven't done this in a long time," she said. "Done what?" "Let someone see me. The real me. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen. Just," she gestured vaguely, "this. I like this. You barely know this. I know enough." She laughed. It was a real laugh, surprising and warm, and it transformed her face into something younger and softer. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." "Probably." She reached up and touched his face, a gentle touch, almost tentative, like she was checking to make sure he was real. "I'm not easy to be with. I work too much. I have trouble expressing emotions. I've been told I have the warmth of a corporate spreadsheet. I've been told I have the social skills of a server rack. We're quite the pair. We are." She kissed him. It was soft at first, questioning, careful, and then it deepened into something else. Something that had been building since she'd caught Mia in the hallway, since she'd handed over her biometric key, since she'd stitched a stuffed rabbit in a kitchen full of cold coffee and code. When they finally pulled apart, the candles had burned lower and the rain had stopped again. "Stay," Nolan said again. This time she didn't argue. 6 months later, the house was different. Not dramatically different. The porch still sagged a little on the left side, and the gutters still needed attention. But the changes were there if you knew where to look. The mailbox had been fixed. The front yard had actual grass now, green and tended. The windows were clean, letting in the pale Seattle sunlight on the rare days when the sun decided to appear. Inside, the changes were more obvious. The dining room was still Nolan's workspace, but it was organized now. Monitors aligned, cables managed, mail sorted into actual categories instead of towering piles. The kitchen had been updated with appliances that worked consistently, including a coffee maker that didn't require physical violence to operate. And there were photographs on the refrigerator. That was the biggest change. For years, the refrigerator had been bare, a white expanse of magnetic potential that Nolan had never gotten around to filling. Now it was covered. Mia's school artwork, a picture from her 6th birthday party which had happened 3 months ago and featured a space princess theme that had required extensive costume construction. A snapshot from the company picnic, where Nolan had been officially introduced as Slate Dynamics' new head of security architecture, a position that came with reasonable hours, actual boundaries, and no expectation that he would sacrifice his family for server uptime. And in the center of it all, held by a magnet shaped like a rocket ship, was a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a single word. The tallest figure had long, dark hair. The medium figure had shorter hair and glasses. The smallest figure was holding what appeared to be a rabbit. The word above them, written in green crayon with the careful intensity of a child who understood the weight of what she was naming, was simple. Family. Nolan stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning making pancakes, actual pancakes, from an actual recipe, following actual directions, while Mia sat at the table doing homework and Vivian read the news on her tablet. It was ordinary. It was domestic. It was everything he'd been afraid he would never have again. "Dad," Mia said without looking up from her math worksheet, "is 11 plus 17 28? "Yep. And 28 plus 12? 40. "I knew that. I was checking." "Sure you were." Vivian smiled behind her tablet. She'd gotten better at smiling over the past 6 months. Not dramatic transformations, not constant grins, but small moments of visible warmth that crept through more and more often. The Ice Queen hadn't melted. She'd just learned that armor wasn't always necessary. "The board approved the restructuring proposal," she said, setting down the tablet. "Full integration with Meridian security infrastructure. Your team is going to have a lot of work." "My team is ready." Your team is 4 people and a lot of ambition. That's how all the best teams start. You've been spending too much time with Rebecca. She says things like that. Rebecca is wise. Rebecca is optimistic to the point of delusion. That's different. Nolan flipped a pancake and slid it onto Mia's plate. She examined it critically, found it acceptable, and drowned it in syrup before returning to her homework. Graham Crow's trial date was set, Vivian added more quietly. February 14th. Valentine's Day. That's fitting. The prosecution is confident. Between the financial records, the security footage, and his confession in the boardroom, not to mention the photography conspiracy, they're building a case that will be difficult to defend against. Will you have to testify? Probably. You too. I figured. Nolan set down another pancake and turned off the stove. How do you feel about it? Vivian considered the question. She did that now. Actually considered questions instead of deflecting them with corporate non-answers. It was one of the changes that had come from therapy, which she'd started 3 months ago at Nolan's gentle suggestion. She'd resisted at first, argued that she didn't have time, that she'd dealt with her grief, that she was fine. Then she'd gone to one session and come home quieter than usual, and the next week she'd gone again, and the week after that. She didn't talk about what happened in those sessions. Nolan didn't ask. But she came home from them different. Not better exactly, but softer, more present, more willing to sit with difficult emotions instead of armoring herself against them. I feel like it will be hard, she said finally, seeing him again, remembering everything that happened, but I also feel like it's necessary. He needs to face consequences for what he did, and I need to see that happen. Will you tell them about the photographer, the smear campaign? Every detail. Douglas Chen has already agreed to testify about the manipulation. Apparently his conscience finally caught up with him. She paused. Or his lawyers explained what accessory after the fact means. Hard to tell which. Mia looked up from her homework. What's a smear campaign? It's when someone tells lies about you to make other people think you're bad, Nolan said. That's mean. It is mean. Did someone do that to Vivian? They tried. But Vivian is very good at showing people the truth. Mia considered this. Vivian is good at most things. Yes, Nolan agreed. She is. Vivian's smile widened slightly, and she reached across the table to tousle Mia's hair. The gesture was natural now, easy in a way it hadn't been 6 months ago. Mia leaned into it with the casual affection of a child who had learned to expect love and was no longer surprised by it. What do we have planned today? Vivian asked. Farmer's market, Mia said without hesitation. You promised. I did promise. And then the aquarium. You promised that too. I seem to have made a lot of promises. You make good promises. Nolan sat down at the table with his own stack of pancakes and watched the two of them, his daughter and this woman who had walked into his life like a storm and decided to stay when the weather cleared. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have believed this was possible. 6 months ago, he'd been drowning in work and guilt and the slow-motion collapse of a life he didn't know how to fix. Now he was having breakfast on a Saturday morning with the people he loved, and the biggest decision he had to make was whether they should go to the farmer's market before or after the aquarium. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. Vivian still worked too much sometimes, stayed late in meetings, brought her laptop home when she shouldn't. Nolan still struggled with the balance between career and family. Still caught himself checking his phone when he should have been present. Mia still had nightmares occasionally, still asked questions about her mother that neither of them could answer, still carried wounds that would take years to fully heal. But they were working on it, together. Before, Mia announced suddenly. Before what? Farmer's market, before aquarium. That way we can get the good donuts before they run out. Sound logic. I have good logic. You have excellent logic. I get it from Vivian. Nolan laughed, and Vivian laughed, and Mia grinned with the particular satisfaction of a child who had just successfully claimed credit for a genetic trait she didn't actually inherit. After breakfast, they cleaned up together, a system they'd developed over months of practice, with Nolan washing, Mia drying the unbreakable items, and Vivian putting things away in the cabinet organization system she'd implemented, and Nolan still didn't fully understand. The house was quiet, except for the sound of water running and dishes clinking and the occasional burst of Mia's commentary on whatever topic had captured her attention that moment. As Nolan handed the last plate to Vivian, their fingers brushed, and she held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For that night, when you let me in." "You threatened to sue me." "I did, and you let me in anyway." "I was tired." "You were kind," she smiled. "You're still kind. You're getting better at saying nice things." "I'm practicing." He kissed her forehead, a gentle gesture that had become part of their language over the past months, a way of saying I see you and I'm glad you're here, and this is real in a touch that took less than a second. Mia burst through the kitchen door, already dressed for the farmer's market in her favorite purple jacket and rain boots that were not at all necessary given the rare sunshine outside, but were, in her opinion, essential for any serious shopping expedition. "Let's go," she commanded. "The donuts wait for no one." They went. The farmer's market was crowded, as it always was on Saturday mornings when Seattle decided to stop raining. Vivian wore sunglasses and kept a lower profile than usual. She'd become recognizable after the press coverage of the Crow scandal, and while most people were sympathetic, she still attracted attention she didn't always want. But today she held Mia's hand as they walked through the stalls, examining strawberries and admiring flowers, and eventually arriving at the donut booth, where Mia debated between maple bacon and chocolate sprinkle with the gravity of someone choosing a life partner. "Get both," Vivian suggested. "Both?" "It's Saturday." Mia's eyes went wide. "Dad, she said both." "I heard. Is that allowed?" "It's her money." "Then yes," Mia said decisively. "Both." They found a bench near the waterfront, watching the ferries cross the sound while Mia alternated bites between her two donuts, and Nolan and Vivian shared a coffee and a quiet moment. "I've been thinking," Vivian said. "About what?" "About the house." Nolan went still. "What about it?" "It's too small, for 3 people and 2 stuffed rabbits." She was looking at the water, not at him. "And the commute from Ballard adds time that could be spent with Mia. There are houses in Capitol Hill, closer to her school and closer to my office, with more space and better foundations and porches that don't require structural prayers. You want to move?" "I want to move together." Now she looked at him. "If that's something you want." Nolan thought about his house, the sagging porch, the fixed mailbox, the kitchen where they'd cracked a $47 million fraud over cold coffee and desperation. It was the house where he'd nearly lost himself, but it was also the house where he'd found his way back. The house where Vivian had stitched Professor Bunn's ear, and Mia had drawn stick figures on the refrigerator, and family had become something real instead of something remembered. "Can we bring the stick figure drawing?" he asked. "Obviously." "And the candles from the drawer? The emergency candles?" "They're romantic now." Vivian laughed. It was still one of his favorite sounds, rare and genuine and entirely unguarded. "Yes," she said. "We can bring the candles." "Then okay?" "Okay? Okay, let's move together." Mia appeared in front of them, her face smeared with maple frosting and chocolate sprinkles, Professor Bunn Jr. tucked under one arm. "Move where?" she asked. "To a new house," Nolan said. "A bigger one. With a yard." "A yard?" Her eyes went wide again. "Can we get a dog?" "Let's start with the house." "But eventually a dog?" "We'll see." "That means yes." She looked at Vivian. "When Dad says we'll see, it means yes. I figured out the code." "Your father is very transparent." "What's transparent?" "Easy to read." "Like a book?" "Exactly like a book." Mia nodded sagely. "He is like a book. A good book. With a happy ending." Vivian looked at Nolan. He looked back at her. And in that moment, on a bench by the water with the Seattle skyline rising behind them and their daughter standing in front of them with frosting on her face and a stuffed rabbit under her arm, the word happy seemed not just possible but present. Not the end of a story, the middle of one. The long, complicated, ordinary middle where people learned to love each other and forgot to take out the garbage and argued about where to put the dishes and woke up every morning choosing each other again. "Come on," Mia said, grabbing both their hands. "Aquarium time." She pulled them up from the bench and started walking, leading them toward whatever came next with the confidence of a child who had learned that the people who loved her would follow wherever she went. And they did. They followed her through the farmer's market and into the car and across the city to the aquarium, where Mia pressed her face against the glass and watched jellyfish pulse in the blue light and declared that she wanted to be a marine biologist when she grew up, unless she decided to be an astronaut, unless she decided to be a CEO, like Vivian, but one who also had a dog. They followed her through the gift shop, where she picked out a stuffed octopus to add to Professor Bun's growing family. They followed her home, to the house that was imperfect but warm, that would soon be replaced by another house that would be different but still theirs. And late that night, after Mia was asleep with her collection of stuffed animals arranged around her like a court, Nolan and Vivian stood in the kitchen looking at the stick figure drawing on the refrigerator, the one with 3 figures and 1 word, and didn't say anything for a long time. They didn't need to. The drawing said it all. 3 people who had found each other in the middle of a crisis and decided to stay when the crisis was over. 3 people who were learning, day by day, how to be what the word described. Family. Not because of blood or obligation or any of the traditional reasons, because of choice, because of presence. Because sometimes the people you're supposed to be with show up on your doorstep in a rainstorm, threatening to destroy you, and then catch your daughter when she falls, and then stay for dinner, and then stay for everything else. And you let them. And it works. And the story, which could have ended so many different ways, ends like this, with a quiet house in Seattle, and 3 figures on a refrigerator, and the rain starting up again outside, and 2 people standing in a kitchen they're about to leave, already imagining the kitchen they'll stand in next. Together.